are one. We are and we are love. For we are one. We are, and we are light. We are. You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same. Never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath, then nothing's here to stay. And all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same. Will never be the same ever again. never be the same.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. My very special guest today is John Borton. How are you, John?
How's it going, Peter?
Mate, so good to have you on the show. Can you
Thank you
believe
for
how
inviting me.
Can you believe how last minute it was?
Yeah, it was very last minute. A couple hours ago, I didn't know this was happening right here. So
Yeah, so I love those kind of interviews because they're just spontaneous and they're an actual conversation, because I've watched you from afar on SDA Fight Club, and I've loved your posts and comments and how you kind of address a lot of the replies. And I've thought for a long time I'd love to have John on the program. So,
well, I'm glad I'm here. You can see how unprepared I was by the background. I'm in our so we experienced a fire here that took our houses and everything, and I'm in an old burned out building that was a shop. And
wow,
hasn't been rebuilt yet. If I was to pan up, you would just see the burned out steel.
wow.
And so I just set up here on a workbench with a whiteboard behind me with a bunch of engineering schematics on it. So that's all there is.
I love it. I love it. It's a conversation. We're unprepared. Apart from your Fight Club stuff, we don't really know each other. We only just discovered in the 2 minutes before we clicked the live button that we both love guitar and music and a lot of the
Yes.
similar artists.
Yeah.
Both have a passion for the Alan Parsons Project, which I could talk about for days.
Yeah.
That artist. And someone has just asked, where is this? I think in the video clip that I was just playing. Don't forget, Facebook users, please put your name, because I only see Facebook user, as you can see on the screen there. That was at a place called Drombeg, or the Drombeg Stones in Ireland, in southwest of Cork, and incredible little stone that 3,000 years old. The Druids were doing ceremonies at that site, and I was amazed to stumble across it. And so I did some music while I was there and had fun. So so we're going to talk today, I guess, a little bit about your leaving Adventism story. And I welcome people to add comments, ask questions. As you go, we'll probably ignore them a little bit to start with, but we'll definitely get to some Q&A a little bit later as well. And so I thought, let's just go back to the beginning. Were you born into the Adventist religion?
Yeah. So I was born in multi-generational. I don't know how many generations back, longer than, you know your great grandfather, but you don't really know your great and all that. But going as far back as I knew, it's been Adventism.
Yeah, multi-generational.
Yeah, so I was born into it. I was born in Texas, and it was not long after that I was I was probably 6 years old. I think it was 6 that the family was in a car accident and put my father in a wheelchair, paraplegic for the rest of his life.
Wow.
And that kind of threw a lot of turmoil into our lives. And I would say mostly because of that, we ended up moving to and joining I'm going to be blunt about it. It was a cult part of the SDA church. It was a sister cult to the Branch Davidians, the Waco bunch.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I grew up, I was pulled out of school in the 2nd grade. And after that, that was an SDA school that I'd gone to in 2nd grade. And I was pulled out of school after 2nd grade when we joined this, this cult. And And so I was raised in a very, very conservative portion of the SDA church in the Bible Belt south of the United States.
Whoa. That's got to have some ramifications that are lifelong.
Yeah,
You know,
it was very, very interesting. My schooling until I ran away from home at 15 consisted of 100% Bible and E.G. White based stuff.
yeah,
They believed that time was so short, education in the more traditional sense, there wasn't time for it. They believed in the Bible verse that says, commit the word to your heart. And so I spent much of the time memorizing the Bible and Ellen White. And I can still, you give me a chapter and verse, and I'll probably be able to recite a lot of it. We
wow,
situations so we could write it out, so we could recreate the Bible because the
yeah,
trouble was coming.
yeah,
Uh, and so it was a very immersive experience. Let's say that.
yeah. Wow, that's incredible. And the the interesting thing I've discovered in doing these interviews is that people that are multi-generational Adventist, there's very few of them actually get to actually leave the church. Those who have left the church usually came into it young or as an adult, or have had more of a progressive kind of background. But multi-generational leaving is very rare. Someone's just asked, were you at Waco when David Koresh was there?
No, I was long gone from there. We moved out of Texas when I was 6 or 8,
Right.
and so the Waco folks were there in those days. But David Koresh is younger than I am, so he probably wasn't even born when I was lived near there and were around that.
That's you look fairly young though. Like, do you mind me asking what vintage you are?
I'm 62.
Really?
Yeah.
What
I
what
do a lot of outdoor stuff. I don't know if that keeps me young or I just have
when
good genes, but
when did you turn 62?
February 17th, so a month or so ago.
See, that's interesting. I'm 62 this month.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so we're both born in 1962,
Yeah.
both 62, both
Yeah.
have a similar multi-generational background, both
Yeah.
left the church, both love music. That
Yeah.
explains why I love a lot of your posts. So you've got this engineering mind, obviously, because you've gone on to become, get employed in that area. At a
Yeah.
young age, did that kind of mind help you start to question some of this stuff? Like as a young age, do you remember going, hang on a second, some of this isn't making sense?
Yeah. I remember, first off, I believed it completely because when you're a child and you're raised with it, that's what you
Yeah,
believe.
yeah,
Uh, and kind of the biggest mistake they made was having me read and commit so much of the Bible. I've read the Bible multiple times. I've read Ellen White's works ridiculous number of times, um, and I couldn't help but notice internal inconsistencies. And so I would ask questions about that,
right,
even as a young. I remember being 8 years old and asking questions like that. And the answers I got were very unsatisfactory to me, but you kind of put them away because as a child, are to believe what you're told, pastor says, father says,
yeah,
and eventually God says.
yeah,
Um, so it certainly, my analytical mind was the bane of my mother. Uh, uh, she was, I'll use the term, the most common thing I heard, but I don't mean that literally because I'm sure it was wake up, is the most common thing I heard, but, or come to dinner. But the thing that I remember most that my mom said most about me was I would ask these questions and she would give me an answer. And I would say, well, that doesn't square with, Revelations 13, or it doesn't square with Hebrews 11. And she would get frustrated with me because I wouldn't simply accept the answer she gave without analyzing it relative to something else. Internal consistency was important to me. And so she would say, what's wrong with you? What's your problem? I have since learned, and it took many years of struggle and therapy to get to this point, but I've since learned my problem was that I asked questions that I wasn't supposed to. That was
Yeah.
that was what was wrong with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm quite comfortable with that.
I think I often think that asking the question why is the best thing to get you out of all error.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just bring up a question Faye Simpson has asked or made a comment anyway. And by the way, Faye, yes, it was Ireland. Drombeg is in Ireland. I am fourth generation SDA. I've seen the light and now know the faults in some of E.G. White's writings and where her thoughts came from, but I will never stop keeping the Sabbath. Faye, do you keep the Sabbath to be saved, or do you just keep it as kind of a nice day to have a rest? So that kind of leads into a good question. As you're asking these why questions and you're getting a bit older and you're starting to go, hang on a second, I don't have to necessarily just believe it hook, line, and sinker. What do you remember as being your first kind of thing that you started questioning and doubting?
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember the pretty large delta between the stories that you would hear in Sabbath school and the stories that I knew were in the Bible because I'd read the Bible even as a young child. And I'll just use the example of the story of Lot. So, the typical Sabbath school story of Lot is, there's the discussion of, are there any good men? Are there any godly men as a reason to save or destroy the town? And eventually the angels come down to the town because they did find a godly man. His name was Lot. And, he's taken away from the town by the angels with his family. And the lesson that I always heard in Sabbath school was when Lot's wife turned around and was turned into a pillar of salt. There's this, this is told in kindergarten Sabbath schools, to the kids about you have to obey. He told them not to look back. She looked back when was turned into a pillar of salt. Well,
Yeah.
there's several levels. There's several levels here. First off, it's like telling a kid a horror story.
It is.
Yeah. I mean,
Child abuse, spiritual
it's
abuse.
incredibly traumatic to tell a child. But that isn't the part, because I was kind of ahead of most of the kids because I read so much Bible. I'm like, wow, you guys skipped a lot of that story. I mean, you skipped a lot of that story. You skipped where Lot offers up his two daughters to the crowd to do with my virgin daughters, to do with the crowd. A crowd, by the way, that was essentially chanting that they were going to have relations with the angels. In other words, they were a sex-hungry crowd, and he offered up his two virgin daughters if they would spare the angels, as if the angels couldn't take care of themselves.
Yeah.
But I kept asking myself, why are they afraid of the actual story? What is it? I could never understand why we always had these stories that they seemed to pick some morsel out of them that to me was not the dramatic morsel.
Yeah.
That was probably the first thing that I started asking about.
Yeah. And I guess the Adventism is all about obedience and the commandments. So that's
Yeah.
why that's the filter they're going to look for in all the stories.
Yes.
Some recent interviews I've done and reaction videos is just I've just become more and more aware the kind of spiritual abuse that Adventism is for young kids. It needs an R rating on a lot of the stories.
Oh, yes.
And like you say, that Lot story, we were told that 7, 8, maybe younger.
Yes.
Often, yeah. So after you'd how old do you reckon you were approximately when you were pondering those things?
By the time I was 9, 10, 11, I was asking questions about what I was reading.
Yeah.
And I was reading this material constantly because that's the only education I got. And I'm an extremely I was hungry for knowledge then. I'm hungry for knowledge now. I've always been an autodidact. And so I was reading eagerly.
Alpha Matter says SDA identity is really submission, outward acceptance, rather surrender, total acceptance. They would like you to submit even if your conscience is against it.
That last sentence is very, very critical because it is exactly that. It's like, a conscience would tell you, wait a minute, this is not a godly man who's offering up his daughters, as rape victims. That's not a godly man. Let me word it differently. For any God I would respect, it's not a godly man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I like how you've put that.
There's a difference. I'm sorry. I'll just elaborate a tiny bit on that.
No,
There's
go
a
for it.
difference. There's a difference between a God that I would believe in. In other words, if a God showed himself to me in such a way that he convinced me he was real, I would believe he exists. That doesn't mean I have to respect him or bow or worship him. I'm not going to respect someone who thinks it's okay to own other people, humans, as property. I'm not going to respect that God, even if he exists.
Yeah. Yeah. When with the very conservative or traditional Adventist style that you were raised in, you can a lot of progressive Adventists and more liberal Adventists can go, oh yeah, I'm so glad I wasn't raised like that, and that wasn't my Adventism. What I've discovered in many ways, they still keep Adventism together though, by not speaking out necessarily against the more conservative element. Why do you think that is? Just like from a you're looking in as an observer now, and you've got that brain that can kind of analyze and think about things in a more rational perspective. What is it about the two sides that are opposed but also hold each other together so well?
Yeah, I like to, and I haven't thought of the words to put this in, but the moderate elements of religion in general, whether it be SDA or otherwise, the moderate portions of religion are what keep it going. And I've sort of determined for myself that any philosophy, any life philosophy, you can call it religion, you can call it, spirituality, you can call it whatever you want. Any life philosophy that encourages extremists to be even more extreme, because extremists are a reality. My parents were extremists. But if a philosophy encourages extremists to be even more extreme, I'm uninterested in that philosophy. To me, a good life philosophy will take extremists and moderate them.
Right.
I'm not a I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not I'm not a follower of Eastern religion. But I have found there are some aspects of some of the Eastern philosophies that do help bring extremism more into moderation. The typical theisms, Christianity, Muslims, that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that everyone's an extreme in those. It doesn't mean that at all. Moderates are going to be moderate. Extremists are going to be extremists. But those do tend, I'll give you the perfect example. As a kid, when they tell me the Bible is 100% true, well, I believed it. I believed it. And so when I found these contradictions, it was like, how in the world can these two things be true? So if you take an extremist and you tell them that all is true, then you have to start figuring out ways to slow them down, because they're going to go, kill the tribe next door. They're going to, they're going to do lots of things that they shouldn't do, because their extremism mind leads them to look at that Bible and go, wow, I get to run somebody through with a sword because God gave instructions to do that over and over.
Mm-hmm. I really like that perspective you're saying there. And in many ways, the general Protestant body of Christians, because the moderate members have successfully, in most denominations, your mainstream Baptists and we call them Anglicans. I think you call them Episcopalians or something.
Mhm.
They essentially often become quite benign, if theologically speaking. Within Adventists, though, even though there's been a very healthy, moderate bunch of members, why do you think they're unsuccessful in bringing about a more mild version of Adventism? At the edge of Adventism, with the sanctuary, the investigative judgment, the time of trouble, some of the fear stuff, it's as strong now as it was in 1844.
Yeah.
Why are the moderates not so successful within Adventism, whereas they have been a little bit more so in
Yeah.
Baptists and Anglicans and Uniting, etc.?
Well, the main the main opinion I would give is Adventism itself is an extreme religion. It's not a moderate religion, never was. That's why it's counted in there with the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's rightfully considered one of those religions. It is an extreme religion. So when you take I have some discussions occasionally with my significant other whose family was much more moderate than I was, but yet I can fairly convincingly, very convincingly, make the argument that that family were absolute incredible extremists relative to, the Baptist family that goes to church just to meet the friends and comes home after and goes and watches a football game.
Yeah,
Adventist, it is an extreme religion.
yeah. And
And
I
so,
think I did a program the other day, something along the lines of Ted Wilson is a real Adventist, and I got a lot of pushback from progressives and liberals saying, "Hey, that wasn't my experience. That's not my Adventism." And I think because so I've thought a lot about it in the last couple of weeks, and I think yes, they are moderate. They view Adventism from this kind of more moderate view, but they forget that Adventism is actually a movement specially called to be a unique movement. So to make it more watered down and moderate is taking away from the very purpose of Adventists coming into being. And so I kind of have a conflict with my progressive brothers and sisters in that I'm saying, well, you might say it's a more watered down Adventism for you, but it's not real Adventism, because real Adventism was given a unique, special calling for a unique, special people.
they were supposed to be separate from those that were watered down.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
In the end, Adventism is an apocalyptic religion. I mean, that's what it is. It relies heavily on the end times, and that's what it teaches.
Yeah. And here's Ted Wilson, the current GC president, literally saying recently that don't let people tell you that you can't keep the commandments and that you can't live a sinless life. I might be paraphrasing slightly, but that was definitely the gist of it. His father was like that in the late 70s, early 80s when he was the president. And we had that time period where Des Ford came along offering a more moderate, more biblical viewpoint, and yet he was thrown to the wolves and exiled. And I was listening to some of his material in the last couple of days, and I don't think any Adventist apologist has addressed the investigative judgment and the sanctuary doctrine in the last 44 years successfully in any way. So they're not defending it, but it still just carries on as this kind of unique doctrine.
That was one of the big surprises, and we can get more into this later. But I kind of have this early time that we're talking about now, and then I have a later time where you know me from.
Yes.
But in the middle there, I was doing engineering in the Silicon Valley and didn't think much about all this stuff. And I was stunned when I came back to see more of the Adventist Church. I moved back to the Bible Belt because of an aging parent, and got to know a lot of my old family and friends. And like you, I was kind of surprised because events that had occurred and that I had been aware of in the 40 years that passed through I was stunned that most people didn't even know about them.
Yeah.
It's like,
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I was maybe 10 years ago, before I left the church anyway, and I left 8 years ago. I was chatting to a youth group, and there was about 30 kids there, and I hadn't really thought about the investigative judgment myself for ages. I'd been that kind of Adventist that was just focusing on Jesus and worship and music and cultural Adventism. And I just said to them, by the way, do you guys know much about the investigative judgment? And none of them had even heard of it. And so the church successfully, until social media really took off, have kind of kept the things they don't want people talking about
yes,
under covers.
yes. So I remember in the late 70s when Donald Yost found that copy of the 1919 Bible Conference,
Mm,
wrapped in brown paper somewhere up on a shelf in the archives. And it's funny because in that brown paper bag or whatever, they describe it as taped up, bundled up. In that was the then 1919 president of the SDA General Conference saying, I hope we can take this entire minutes that were taken, this entire transcript. I hope we can hide it away so no one ever gets to read it. Well, that's what they did. Until
yeah,
Donald Yost found it in the late 70s. That's exactly what happened. The white estate didn't even know it existed.
incredible. And
Yeah.
what's incredible is Prescott and A.G. Daniels, the president at the time, they actually believed a more watered down, moderate version of
Yes.
Adventism. And let's use moderate instead of watered down. And ironically, he also wanted it hidden away, though, because he felt that the members just wouldn't cope with it. It would split the
Right.
church. And then those that opposed him and wanted the more um, extreme version, what I call real Adventism, its actual purpose for being, those that wanted its purpose for being to be held on high, they ensured that he was booted out anyway.
Yeah.
And so both of them wanted hidden. And that's the exact
Yeah.
thing I find today, 100 plus years later. Um, and it's a conundrum, and that's why I'm interested in your thoughts on it. Why do the people that want more moderation and those that want the more extreme, why do they both work together to ensure that it just remains all hidden and it remains kept under? And so therefore, because they're both working to do that, and I find that the more progressives are culpable because of this, because of that willingness to keep it silent, it's the children that listen to the Lot stories that suffer. It's the
Yeah.
children that get the spiritual abuse ongoing and ongoing. And so
Yeah.
when they say, oh, but that's not my Adventism, I think that's rubbish. I think in most Adventist churches, every Sabbath, there's some story going on for some poor little kid that's freaking them out.
Yeah. You take the Donald Yost discovery of the 1919 conference, and then I remember when Ronald Graybill in 1981 addressed open session of General Conference with a absolutely damning report on Ellen White. And he was an executive in the Ellen White estate, and I forever am grateful for his honesty and bluntness. I disagree with Ron on a bazillion different things, but I have to hold him in respect for that moment because he got up in front of he didn't hide it, right up in front of the General Conference in open session, and gave that report with the 7 damning points that just go, holy cow, And then I thought to myself, wow, this is likely to be the end of the SDA Church. And now, I was out by then. And then, the GC commissioned Veltman to do his study, same topic. And it took 10 years and millions of dollars, or 9 years. And so I was like, well, they're at least trying to do the right thing. They commissioned a study. And when he came out with, the famous Veltman study, which was published the whole thing wasn't published in Ministry Magazine, but the summary was published in Ministry Magazine in 1991, I think it was. And I just read that and I go, yeah, now this is the end, because this is the official report commissioned by the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It was performed by the head of the theological department at Union College, and your jaw dropped at what it said. It questioned her honesty. It did more than question her honesty, all the way through. And I went, well, that's the end, and I was so naive because 25 years later, when I went back to the Bible Belt, I'm dealing with a relative who was in Southern University there through Adventist education her entire life, from beginning to end. She had never heard of development studies. She didn't know who Ron Graybill was. She hadn't heard of the 1919 Bible Conference. It was just gone, just gone, as
Yeah.
if it never happened. And that experience of her not knowing that is what led me to write my book on Ellen White that I did. She said, they said.
Well, I didn't know that you've written a book.
Yes, yeah. It's self-published. I'm not going to make, big.
How do we get a link to that?
I'll send you a link to it, and you can post it on your stuff.
Yeah, if possible, even if you send it now, and I'll put it on the like, is it a website they can go to, and then that way you can just say the website.
They can download it. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me the website while we're talking.
Let me pull up a. I'll get it to you soon enough.
Yeah,
because of that experience, I was retired at the time, and I needed something to do. I have to be doing something all the time, and so I wrote a book for her. Just intended it for her. And turns out a lot of other people enjoyed it. It's written from a very different perspective than most books. I've never read The White Lie. I've never read, these books that the SDA say, well, they were written by a disgruntled ex-SDA. It's like, I've never read them. I would always prefer to read the source than to read a book about the book. It's like, no, I'll just read the book. I don't need to read the source.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't need to read, the book about it. So I wrote this from a perspective. It only contains quotes from her supporters. That's it. It doesn't contain. I describe it as it only includes friendly sources. No one gets to say, well, yeah, but that's Walter Ray and he was mad. It's like, no, these are only people that supported her, because her supporters damned her with things that they said about her. This is back in the day when they knew her. You talk about Prescott and those guys.
Yeah.
Man, those were, they knew how the sausage was made.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we won't get any further sidetracked than that on it, but I will say.
No, that's not sidetracked. That's gold. I didn't realize that. I'll be buying it tonight. And can you download it?
It's not for sale. You just get to download it. That's all.
Wow.
There's an audiobook version of it and a printed version.
Oh, I love that it's on audio. That's how I kind of devour most of my material.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. I encourage everybody to go, and we'll definitely be posting the link to that during the interview. It's interesting now that this information is out there, and social media, the animal that it is, the Adventists can't silence it anymore. But what I'm finding is that they are quite successful in turning their real Adventist members away from it, to make sure you don't go and read that. And they do the classic default attack on the person, not what the person's saying, and therefore the people go, well, we're not even going to go and read that material. But what surprises me is those that are the academics and the scholars and the progressive Adventists, the gospel Adventists, they come up, instead of going jaw drop, this is it for me, I'm walking away from this, they find ways to defend it. And this is, again, the idea I'm sort of suggesting today, that the left and right of Adventism, they work together to keep it together, which I just don't get how that, now that it can't be pushed under the carpet, how are they so good at rationalizing it?
Yeah, I don't know. Ultimately, the SDA church, and this is true of any church, is I hesitate to say it's just a social club, because it's not just a social club, but there are very strong social aspects to it. There's identity wrapped into it. My significant other, daughter of a missionary pastor, she was born in Africa when her folks were over there as missionaries. It was a very long time before she could identify as not being an SDA. It was her identity.
Yeah.
I'm an SDA. I'm an SDA. Boy, it's really hard to say I'm not an SDA anymore. And I think there are people who are threatened, and I don't mean this I'm not being critical to that. It's a natural human nature. If your identity and your social connections are threatened. And I think
Yeah.
that may be, I don't claim to be the expert, but maybe that's one of the reasons that people try to hold it together is like, wow, if we were to lose it, it would really hurt me.
We'd lose ourselves. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting because I think sometimes I'll notice if I criticize someone's belief, I feel like they think I'm criticizing them.
Right.
And like we said off air briefly, the connection to music that maybe we've both had helped us feel a part of a different kind of identity. And so when people attack, maybe if people were attacking music and musicians that I liked, maybe I would have gotten upset. But when
Well,
people attacked my beliefs, I thought, oh, they're just attacking the beliefs. They're not attacking me.
right. It's so true because I have run into people that when I'll give you a good example. I'm a huge Kenny Loggins fan, but I
Right.
call him Mushmouth. You
Right.
know, his enunciation is not all that great some of the time. He did a duet with Stevie Nicks, and he's like, I can't tell what either of them are saying. But there are people who really will take that personally. When I call Kenny Loggins Mushmouth and go, you have no idea how big of a fan of Kenny Loggins I am. I've seen him
Yeah.
countless times in concert.
Yeah.
He's like one of my musical heroes. But I can say he's Mushmouth because that's what he is.
That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people's identities get wrapped up.
Yeah, that's very true. I won't mention names, but I was watching an exchange between you and an Adventist who I'm a friend with and is a progressive, and I was feeling critical, and I was about to jump in and say some things there that to me were like, I wanted to support what you were saying and kind of double down on it and have a bit of a go at him, and he and I do, so he wouldn't have minded, but I didn't because I suddenly realized that's what I was doing for so many years as well. I would have been the guy saying the same things he did to defend Adventism.
Yeah.
Um, so
Here's the
I
question.
understand it as well, but I also wonder how do you kind of does it matter if they get a different view and they shift? I mean, I'm glad I did. I was in the precursor to SDA Fight Club Xbox. Remember that one? It was called
Right. Yes.
yeah. Steve Wold, who used to be my drummer in my band. Stephen Wold, great guy, was a pastor, went on to be a youth pastor, got quite high up in the conference kind of level in Adelaide. He started that group, and I was in there. In my mind, I wasn't, I was a moderate Adventist, cultural Adventist, and I was focusing on the good stuff. But it really confronted me, and I would kind of say these things into the group, just like my friend the other day was saying to you, and I would get just battered by people from it. And I'm so glad they did. I'm so glad that the John Borton of the day was having to go at me because that shook me so much.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that I now have this different perspective. Um, and I'm learning all the time. But so do you think it's important that people are woken out of this? And B, if so, what kind of ways have you seen that are effective in making that happen?
I don't think there's any one way that works for any, all group of people. Um,
There's a unique kind of
as you know,
progressive Adventist, though, that seems to be almost one person. There's a unique kind of progressive Adventist. They still like Ellen. They love Adventism. They talk about the social stuff. They're often quite healthy and dress well. But there's a naivety there that just kind of
yeah,
comes through that I had as well.
I was away, for years, like I said, I didn't think too much about this. I was awakened uh, to some of the analytics of this by a friend of mine who was really brutal. And what I've learned is that technique worked for me. Doesn't work for everyone. So he was very brutal about the logical or illogical nature of some of the conclusions, and it worked for me. Other people, It doesn't. You have to be. I'm gonna describe. There are people in the group that you and I are in that are very effective at what they do. Um,
And this
that
is
are
the SDA Fight Club, you mean?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. They're very effective at what they do, and they use an incredibly different approach from mine. I'm kind of the sledgehammer,
Yeah.
and what I've come to understand is that it takes a sledgehammer for some people, and other people, when they see the sledgehammer, they just walk away and don't listen. That's fine
Yeah.
because there are other people who are perfect fit for them,
Yeah.
who can work with it. So I don't think there is any one way that will wake any group of people up. It takes
Right.
all kinds.
Right. Yeah. Right. And do you think the waking up is important? A lot in my last, the one that I got a lot of pushback from, the Ted Wilson is a real Adventist. I got so much pushback from that, where people were almost saying, "Look, just leave us alone." We not from the conservatives, my
Yeah, sure.
progressive friends, even
Yeah.
my close friends. Look, just leave us alone. We're happy. And I think, are you really? But okay.
Well, I'll tell a story, and I'm going to try. I'll do my best to leave names out of it, not because anybody in this group would know it, but because I haven't been given permission to tell the story with names, so I'll not. An old friend of mine had a daughter who was going to Southern University, which is one of our big, kind of middle of the road, moderate universities in United States. Seventh Day Adventist University. They're no, that they're not cultish. They're very open. Just a classic SDA university, and so we can think of it as moderates. And her daughter, who was going to school there, as part of the curriculum, I don't know whether it was a multimedia class or an art class. Don't know. Doesn't matter. She and her lab partner produced a video as part of one of their tasks, and her mom posted it on Facebook. This was 10 15 years ago. Posted it on Facebook, and I watched. It was like a 10-minute video. I watched just the introduction, and that's all I watched, because the introduction was, and I'm going to paraphrase here, and there was some, the video is followed with some kind of dramatic interaction between the two partners. This video is designed to demonstrate how without God we are worthless and worthy of destruction. And I hit click. That's as far as I'm going. I don't need to go any further than that. I grew up with that. I don't need that. Okay. So there is, and I may be exaggerating to say hundreds, there were countless amens, oh, that's so wonderful, in the Facebook posts following that. And I have a policy that among friends and family, I give myself one time per year to bring stuff up. I don't want to sit around the Thanksgiving table and discuss theology and have everybody get mad at everybody.
Yeah.
And I decided I was using my once a year right now. And I commented, I said, you're wonderful. You're not worthless and worthy of destruction, no matter what circumstances. You are a person who loves your God's creation. You're constantly rescuing animals. You're doing kind things for people. I see this because I see it posted on Facebook. There's no condition like that you should consider yourself worthless and worthy of destruction. And that was all I put. She sent me a message that was classic canned theology. Oh, I know my God is real, blah, blah, blah. I'm not questioning whether your God is real or not. I'm merely saying that I struggled with my life because I was taught the exact same thing. So when I rejected that philosophy, I was now worthless and worthy of destruction. And I said, the damage it does is incredible. It's awful. You are not that. I have friends who are atheists who would do anything for you. They would do kind things. They do kind things all the time. They're not worthless and worthy of destruction. So we went back and forth a few times. And she said, I'll have to think about that. And then 6 months later, We had not had an interaction. She sent me another note that said, I'm still thinking about that.
Wow.
And so about a year after that, I was visiting her town there in Tennessee at Southern, and I just dropped her a note and said, hey, would you like to go to dinner? She said, yes. Can my mom come? And I said, of course. So we meet, and in my mind, of course, I'm going to revisit those comments. I'm going to wait for the right time, but I want to look her in the eye and say what I said to her in that post. So eventually, towards the end of dinner, I found some segue into, and that's why I wrote that comment. And so while I'm elaborating it on that, her mom just broke down into tears. She's sobbing. And the daughter is glaring at me with eyes that were like laser beams. So I've got these two women that I care about on the other side of the table that are both just having completely different emotional reactions. But I wasn't going to stop saying what I was saying. And that was, you are wonderful as a human. These things that we're taught about being awful, it's not true. And finally, she said, the daughter said, do you know why mom is crying? I said, no. And she says, I've been struggling and suicidal for months now. And she goes, it's exactly because of what you're saying. I'm going to break down in tears right now.
Yeah. Wow.
Because long story short, she's doing great. We were able to get her help. But the key thing to me was she was immersed in moderate SDA. She was just in this giant school, people all around her, and they were all going. These were not weird cultists who were going amen to her video. Oh, that was great. That was awesome.
It's all
No, these are just normal, moderate people. And I'm telling you, it's damaging.
Yes. Yeah.
It hurts people.
Yeah. And the keepers of the flame, those that I see as the gospel Adventists, the ones that provide the good youth programs and provide this kind of good vibe Adventism, they don't realize that they are almost leading young sheep with false hope to potentially getting the less moderate view. Like Ted Wilson's wanting to release 1 billion copies of The Great Controversy out there, and it's like there's pitfalls that the moderates, in doing this nice amen, let's keep you guys happy Sabbath, they're not realizing that they're leading these lambs off into a theological slaughter that does, and there's data to confirm that does lead to these kind of ideations that are not healthy, and these deep sadnesses of not being worthy that you speak of. And I wonder, are they? And I was that guy too. I'm doing the worship songs and stay in the church,
Sure.
guys, and and I think I didn't even realize until once I was actually doing a song service, and there was all little 7 and 8 year old junior Sabbath school kind of age group. And there was a really soft, sacred feeling at the end of the song service. Everyone was just really having this kind of nice sense of gentle worship, sacred, Jesus is present kind of feeling. And the pastor got up and started delivering this kind of scary kind of theology. And I just looked at the kids and they started crying. And I thought, wow, I softened them up for that. And why did I still stay in the church for another 15 years or whatever? Like I was softening them up for these more brutal spiritual abusers to come along and just add their 2 cents worth. And sure, there's the nice guys that come along and add their beautiful One Project Jesus stuff. But there are probably more wolves out there that are going to offer up the spiritual abuse. And I ponder, why did I just keep doing it? And what right, someone said to me, what right do you have to, to call us out on this kind of thing? And it's making me say, well, what right do I have? And I can only think of my own experience. why did I take so long to go, I just can't put my name to this anymore. I cannot
Right.
put my name to it anymore.
It's interesting. I have a sister, an older sister, who grew up just like me, of course, arranged marriage, all kinds of interesting stuff. And I would have conversations with her after I was long gone. And it was like talking to myself in terms of the logic and the reason and the questions she had. And yet it took her 20 additional years
Yeah.
before she was able to shed that identity. And she says this to this day. She goes, I don't understand why. Because I said, Lonnie, I would talk to you and go, she's starting at the same conclusions I have, but yet she was
Mm.
still in it.
Yeah.
So I don't
Yeah.
have the answer. She doesn't have the answer
Yeah.
as
And
to
and
why.
I had the same thing with my sister in reverse. She was the one who left years ago and would
Yeah,
have these conversations with me, and I could hear myself saying these silly defenses of it.
yeah.
I want to bring up a conversation you had with someone that really hit me this week. I'm not going to mention names at all, but I'm interested in your thoughts on kind of what unfolded in the conversation, because it's a bit of an example of what we're talking about. And would you say it's cognitive dissonance going on here, or is it confirmation bias? What do you think was going on in the conversation? I'm not going to go into it too much, but you reiterated a sentence that someone had written, and without names, I'll just mention the sentence again. No, it's nothing about the person at all. It's just the conversation, what was going through your mind as you had this conversation. So you've written here, and you don't mind me reading out your post, do you?
Oh, no. No, no, not at all.
You've written here this. So this person has said, "quote The stories are the evidence."
Yes.
And I remember seeing that and going immediately, like the stories that support Joseph Smith. He had 11 people write signed affidavits that they had seen the plates, and 4 wrote, I think I might be wrong on this, but there was a lesser amount that literally signed that they saw it in process. So stories to me aren't actually evidence, but this is so what goes on in the post. Here we go.
Yeah. Well, it's
Uh,
one of the things that I decided in my 20s when I said that I was going to. I'm going to backtrack for a tiny second before we get to that to explain the
yeah,
background of this.
and then I'll
Uh,
read the post.
yeah, when I was in my 20s, I saw and if someone remembers, because it was some popular literature, it was some famous book or something, and in this book there was a girl who's kind of the focus of the book, and she is young. I believe she's an orphan. She's headstrong, and her aunt, who was raising her, kept saying, "Girls don't do that. Girls don't do that. Girls don't do that." And at one point she says, can you show me the list of things that girls aren't supposed to do? And her aunt says, why? So you can break them all? And she said, no, so I can decide for myself
I
which on
love
the
it.
list I should or should not do. And I remember distinctly reading that and saying to myself, by this time I had figured out that I had been lied to. And I am going to, some people throw away everything they grew up with. It's like, if you grew up with it, now I hate it. I didn't want to do that. Everything I grew up with wasn't bad.
Mm,
It's not like I am a person who says things Jesus taught, they were all bad. It's like, no. But I want to decide for myself. Okay. And one of the things I decided on was I wanted to be internally consistent and to insist on the same level of evidence for my own beliefs as I required of other beliefs. Now we can get back to that post.
yeah.
Uh,
I'll read it out, and then I'll
yeah,
get your comment on it.
yeah,
So you've said the person and their quote, the stories are the evidence. And then you've said creation stories are common and different culture to culture. The Native Americans have their stories of Yati, the buzzard, who, growing tired of holding out its wings, let them drag, thus creating the long Appalachian ridges and valleys. The Dambinjari have the stories of the Wungur, the creator snake, passed down for generations. I'll stop with just these two examples, but there are enough to fill entire books. I'm quite confident that, and the person that had made that quote, will not be soon vouching as to the truth of the two above creation stories, and yet he claims that the stories are the evidence. What this person meant to say here is that the stories he likes are evidence, and the stories he doesn't ascribe to are just so much fiction. Double standards are no path to truth. Now, I won't go into. There's a whole lot of replies from this person, and I think it'd make a really interesting interview here one day if we had both him and you on the program,
Yeah.
because this guy's a great guy. I count him as a friend, and we catch up. In fact, when I was a youth, he was very much involved in inspiring me, protecting me, supporting my music, that kind of thing. And so I've got nothing but good things to say. But what the point here is not the players. This content of the stories are the evidence. Unpack a little bit more of your thoughts on writing that post and the comments that ensued.
Yeah, well, this is a big thing of me. A big thing that I say a lot is people say, well, the Bible is the evidence. Like, no, the Bible is the claim. The claim is not evidence. If the Bible is the evidence, if the stories in the Bible are the evidence, then the Quran is the evidence. The Book of Mormon is the evidence. Everything that Joseph Smith ever wrote, Mary Baker Eddy, Russell, L. Ron Hubbard. If the story is the evidence, and you're going to be internally consistent, then you have to accept all that other as also being truth. One of the big things that I wish I could, it's the single biggest thing I wish I could teach people to use in analytical thinking is in programming and computer programming, we call it the if-then statement. If this is true, then this must also be true. So if the Bible, if just the fact that it's written in a book just is the evidence, well, then we have that other list of things. If my personal experience is the evidence, then the personal experience of the person who's a Hindu or the person who is a Muslim or the person who is a Buddhist, that is also the evidence. And unless you give heavier evidentiary weight to the philosophy that you like, you're not. If you do that, then you can conclude, well, I'm right and they're wrong. But if you give equal evidentiary weight to the experience itself, kind of comes out as a tie.
Yeah, well, that's a good way to approach all things that you're trying to decide truth.
Right. So what I say is, okay, you say your creation story is the evidence. I mean, and literally that's what this person said. The story is the evidence, because I was pushing for actual evidence. Well, if you say that and you have the American Indian giving you another story, and you have the Aborigine or whatever I'm not familiar with Australian stuff. I actually looked that example up to find an Australian example because I knew I was in an Australian group. I'm not claiming to know the history of that. If you take those people, how do you break the tie? Well, the only way to break the tie is evidence, not stories, but actual evidence. There's no way to break a tie other than that if you're actually interested in truth. A good example I use is we had an experience in the San Francisco. I'm from California. We had, this is 10 plus years ago. There was a giant explosion at the end of the runway for San Francisco International Airport. When you take off from San Francisco International, the jets climb up very steeply because they have to climb a hill, literally a hill filled with houses, before they reach the coast and the ocean. It's like 5 miles of neighborhoods before you reach the ocean. So they pull up really steep and hard. Well, about halfway up that hill, we're talking several miles away from the end of the runway, but about halfway up that hill, giant explosion one day. News media, everybody running to it. there's just giant flames. I mean, we're talking the size of a small town. It's unbelievable what's happening. And they start interviewing people. And people are saying, yeah, plane crash, went down, into the runway. I saw it go in. I saw the tail. I saw the crash. Multiple people they're interviewing. There was no plane. There was no plane crash. It was a huge natural gas pipeline that exploded. Lack of maintenance, exploded, blew up 10 houses, killed a bunch of people. But it's natural. You're at the end of the runway. These giant airplanes just barely miss these neighborhoods every time. Evidence matters. There were people literally saying, multiple people, we saw the plane crash.
Yeah. Wow.
So when people say they saw something, it doesn't mean much to me.
Yeah.
People say, well, why would they lie? I'm not a psychologist. I don't claim, you can think of a half a dozen reasons as to why, and some of them aren't lies. Some of them would be outright lies. I want to get on the news.
Yeah.
Some of them would be, I heard a jet engine. Well, the gas coming out of this pipe sounded like a jet engine. I heard a jet engine, and so I just saw the plane as it crashed. Some of it can be what they believed they saw, what they assumed they saw. I don't know why people do, but you need more than the story. You need evidence.
It's like we fill in certain gaps. Like I've done this myself, and it's embarrassing to admit it because it's such a big thing. I posted recently this guy that was very critical of my playing bush dance music at Avondale, and he does this very vitriolic talk against me, calls me a snake, against the whole thing. But I would recount to a couple of friends that he had also said, this is me admitting this as a big flaw and fault in my recounting of the story. I said, he also said to his audience, oh, that guy, what's his name? And someone in the audience calls out Peter Dixon. Yes, I would like to go back in time with the prophets and throw him off and join with them in throwing him off the nearest cliff. So I recounted that to a couple of close friends in confidence before I did the show. And then I watched his program over and over many times just to get ready for the show and trying to find that bit that he'd said it. Now, he does talk about people like me, the patriarchs would go, I don't know why that's doing that in the background. People like me would most likely have been thrown off cliffs back then. So there is a correlation, and he does lose my name at some point. And there's all sorts of negative things, but my brain sewed together a story that made it even more effectively him anti-me in a way more personal way than was actually said. Yeah, there's lots of things he said, definitely, that were just inappropriate, abusive, bordering on what do you call it, when defamation kind of stuff. But I filled in the gaps to make it even more so to support my narrative. And I'm the guy opposed to doing that kind of thing. That's why I'm admitting it, because I if I can do it, anyone can do it. So here you're saying, here's this story of this, it must have been the airplane. It becomes a story where they're telling, and quite honestly believe it, that it was an airplane that they saw. And so when I hear stories of Ellen White and her holding up the book and stuff, I don't go, oh, that happened, the story's right. I look at my own brain and I go, nah, that's an example of this kind of crazy. And what is it? Like you said, You're not a psychologist, but what's going on with our brains to do that?
Yeah, if you've read the 1919 Bible Conference transcript, they reference that scene in there, and the president goes, I can't find anybody that was there.
Yeah.
Just maybe we shouldn't be using that as evidence.
Yeah, and in fact, the guy that they've often said, supported that, Loughborough, he wasn't there, and he had heard it via his sister or something, who said that her friend was there, and that's even not provable. So this kind of thing, and the person that you were conversing in that we just talked about then, also wrote to me when I did my show on the holding up the Bible episode, saying that she may well have done that. Why would we disagree with that? Are you going to then next say that maybe Jesus didn't feed the 5,000?
Well,
And I'm going, maybe not. Maybe we're looking at something deeper there, a metaphor of, well, what does that stand for? You've got a bit of food, you've got more than you need, share it with the people near you. Maybe that's a better story to take away than a
I
miraculous story.
I kind of feel like that we have an opportunity right now in the last few years to witness something that to me helps explain some of the Bible stories, or a lot of the Bible stories. We have today, it's called going viral. You have something, and maybe it catches interest, maybe it does catch interest. And there's a lot of people who literally are trying to create something that will go viral. I mean, they're trying hard, and there are people who will create stories or images or whatever. Back in the day, it would have been only written, that have no connection to truth whatsoever. If they can get it to go viral, it's like, yay.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're doing it for financial reasons. Sometimes they're doing it just to say to my buddies, hey, I did that. Isn't that crazy? People believed what I said and it went viral. I kind of see the Bible stories as the going viral of their day. Okay. Did you really think that the story of Jesus just tending the sheep and nothing happens and he comes back the next day and does it again is going to go viral? No, it's a story of him feeding 5,000 people. It doesn't even have to have deeper meaning. It could have just been a story that sounded great and people believed it.
And we're wired almost to follow the viral story. And I read a study once that anecdotal evidence carries more weight than empirical data. If someone is shown an anecdotal story over the actual facts, they're more likely to believe the anecdotal story. Boy, isn't that profound? That we're almost wired to seek that kind of thing out. And
Yeah, I like to say the plural of antidotes is not empirical evidence. It's like, it doesn't matter how many of them you have.
Yeah. There's some interesting comments coming in on what we're talking about. I'll bring them up and just get your thoughts on them. Stephen Beagles, who actually runs a really great Gospel Adventist website. Stephen, pop it in the comments and we'll let people go and check it out. He says the Holy Scriptures are a library of 66 different books written over 4,000 years by 40 different authors. They're all consistent and corroborate each other, much different than the Quran.
Except they're not consistent.
Yeah.
This is, we're not going to open up our Bibles and start going through it right here, but there are plenty of places you can find inconsistencies. I mean, first off, I'll give you the biggest inconsistency of all. God is love. God says it's okay for us to own other humans as property. I'm sorry, that's inconsistent right there. We know that now. A God that knows everything and that is forever would not. He would know that then. Maybe we as brutal cultures back then wouldn't have known that, but he should have told us. We had to figure it out on our own. It's not okay. It's just not. This is one of the, we're talking about things I say to moderates is, do you believe in the lake of fire? Well, that's not moderate. Sorry, there's nothing moderate about the lake of fire. Do you believe in the resurrection? Yes. So you believe that a God that may have killed us supernaturally, let's take Lot's wife. Okay, she was killed supernaturally. She's going to be raised in the resurrection. Why? So God can kill her again. Literally, she's going to get killed supernaturally twice.
Yes.
And why is he raising her? Just so he can go, you believe me now. You're going to bend your knee. Every knee shall bow. It's like, really? Your God is love? Not if you believe that.
And Ellen has that additional vision where those at the end of time those that were more sinful will burn longer than the less sinful.
Yes, and she actually quantified it at one point. I believe she says as many as several days. In other words, if you're bad enough, you're going to burn for several days. Do you remember how she came to that conclusion? Do you remember the background of that?
No, other than God told her.
Yeah. Well, so she said it would not be fair. And I'm going to use the name Hitler. I don't think she used the name Hitler. In fact, she wouldn't have, because she wouldn't have known about him. But I'm going to use him as an example. He needed to burn longer than the saints burned at the stake. Otherwise, it was not a fair punishment. So it isn't an instantaneous death.
No.
Or that wouldn't be a fair judgment.
Yeah.
She literally describes this of, you have to burn longer than you have to be kept alive supernaturally in the lake of fire so that you won't die a normal death. So, Lot's wife is killed supernaturally. Then she's raised from the grave supernaturally. Then she's going to be killed a second time supernaturally. And she's going to be kept alive for agony supernaturally so that she can burn longer than a saint who was burned at the stake. God is love. There's your inconsistency.
Yeah.
A parent would never do that. I've had this discussion with many parents, and I say, if your daughter, because people will say, "Oh, that's just a natural. It's a natural result." It's not a natural result. If your daughter had a drug problem, let's say, and she died of an overdose of drugs, now that's a natural reaction. Okay, she took too many drugs and she died. Okay, that's a natural reaction. That's a natural result of, for a moment, we'll use the term sin. I don't believe in that term, but we're going to use it. That's a natural result of sin. However, as a parent, would you raise her up again supernaturally just so you could poke at her and say, do you see what you've done? Now I'm going to kill you again, and I'm going to kill you in a more painful way than you died before. No parent would do that.
No.
We know better.
Yeah. Here's another comment. Again, Facebook users, put your name in there. I would never say I'm right and you're wrong. What is evidence today might be opposite evidence tomorrow. I change my mind often. Not sure what they're referring to. Maybe.
No, I don't know what they're referring to exactly, but I sure like the I change my mind often part.
Yeah.
New evidence. If you change your mind because of new evidence, that should be respect, not disdain. It's like, that's awesome. I don't know is a great word, and I changed my mind is just an awesome phrase.
I'm just looking up. Yeah, 100%. And to say I don't know, I don't have an answer to that. They're valid things to say. I'm just bringing up, because this is just Facebook users not putting their name to it, and I think it'll make more sense if I know what they're saying. Here we go. This is that was Keith Palouse who said that last one, changing his mind often. And this is Angela Lima. Hey, Angela. That's the reason everyone should visit Israel. I saw a lot of evidence there.
I would ask evidence for what? I can't respond to that.
I think she might be being a bit tongue-in-cheek with that one. Peter,
I'm sure it's a great. There's amazing amounts of history over there.
Peter Veach, welcome, Peter. Peter Veach founded SDA Fight Club, and I'm hoping we can share this over there later. Peter has written, it's normal for humans to see things that aren't there and not see things that are there. Stephen Jackson writes, those people's stories of the supposed plane crashing was evidence. It's just evidence that was invalidated by additional evidence. What are your thoughts on that, and how people won't change their story even though the additional evidence is given?
Yeah. First off, it's a fair comment. We don't like physical evidence without human collaboration, and we don't like the inverse. The best evidence is when we can meld the two. So he's not wrong, but evidence, a story without matching physical evidence, is really not strong evidence
Mm.
because
Yeah.
there's so many stories that aren't true.
Yeah. And I think what Stephen's saying there is that even though later the evidence proved that that wasn't the case, people may have kept believing that it was the plane.
I'm sure there's conspiracy theories still alive that say there's a plane buried in San Bruno. I don't know. People believe some very odd things.
Esther has written, maybe he edited it later, referring to my comment, and maybe he did because I had written in the comments that was libelous what he was saying to throw me off a cliff. So maybe, but I might be just rationalizing to try and make my mind go, no, you did see that. But either way, this stuff happens. Fred has written, I saw a post today that said Abraham never should have had Hagar. Abraham was a coward at times. I have an issue with God on some things. Not sure exactly that one. You might want to unpack that a bit more, Fred. I appreciate your comments always. Stephen said, historically, narratives are a form of evidence.
I don't disagree with that. I will say that we have plenty of historical narratives that conflict with each other. So the only way to reconcile narratives is, in the end, you need some kind of physical evidence when you have two. I mean, if you and I disagree, if you say, Muhammad and I say Jesus, well, how do we reconcile that? It has to be it has to be reconciled with something more than stories, because they both have stories. It has to be reconciled with something more than personal experience, because I can tell you the personal experiences that people recount to me, religious personal experiences, they sound just identical in substance, whether it comes from a Muslim or a Christian or a Hindu. They sound the same.
That's right. Yeah. Like Joseph Smith, you have that feeling in your bosom. Again, relying on these feelings. If you feel it, it must corroborate that the story is true.
Yeah, if you think the personal
Every
experience, if you think that the personal experience of the Jehovah's Witness that knock on your door, and you may not have that in Australia, but we have that.
no, we definitely do.
Okay.
We have it on steroids over here.
Yeah, if you think the personal experiences that they recount are any less dramatic, sincere as yours are, yeah, you're wrong. I've listened to them all.
Yeah. Random T Chances put referring to the airplane story we were talking about, the self-inflicted Mandela effect.
Yeah, I'm quickly going to comment on something Stephen Jackson said. He's the guy that made the comment that stories are evidence; they can be supplanted by additional evidence. And I said it was a fair comment.
Oh yes, yeah.
He responded again and saying, "Sure, we need additional evidence, but stories are a form of evidence."
Yeah.
I agree with that, but they are not evidence which stands alone. And the whole thing that started this conversation was a person taking a position that said the stories are the evidence. In other words, that's all he had. And he was saying that is the evidence.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you've clarified that one. Did you want to talk about the Mandela effect at all that Random just raised? I wonder if I'll have to look that one up and see if it correlates to what we're talking about. Steve Beagles again, Gospel Adventist. Naturalists will never expect any evidence of the supernatural.
He can't support that with evidence.
Yeah. And the scary thing about that is that, like the Vikings believed in Odin and would kill themselves, have sacrifices, take over neighboring villages, slaughter people because of their belief in the supernatural connection with Odin. And one of their big claims was the feeling that they got confirmed his the reality of Odin. And so I guess, Stephen, a question that I'd ask you is how do you then differentiate between other people's claims of supernatural experiences to know yours is right and theirs is wrong? I'd love your thoughts on that, Stephen, if you want to add to that. This is Kevin again. Keith, Keith Palouse. I've interviewed Keith. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Keith? Operative word on Adventist unkindness that is pervasive and entrenched. I take that as a comment. Arthur Klim. Had a great interview with Arthur. If you ever go back and have a look there, John, about the Veltman study. We did a two-part chat on the whole Veltman study. Yeah, fascinating. And Arthur has written, how many have studied the prophecies about Jesus in the Old Testament? Most believe there are many. Read them in context and they don't exist. A lie repeated often enough becomes truth.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'll give a little side one to that. So my significant other, her dad, Adventist minister, missionary. And this was, I was sitting with Herb. Herb was her dad. I was sitting with Herb one time. This was 6-8 years ago. We were actually in a hospital emergency room waiting for someone. And I was sitting next to him. And I said to him, hey, Herb, the Daniel and Revelation seminars that, the famous Adventist Daniel prophecy, they show the big statue and, the feet of clay and the head of gold and all that. He goes, yeah, of course. I said, do you know that prophecy falls apart right from the very beginning? Right? It's like second verse in and it already falls apart. He goes, oh, what do you mean? And I go, well, the traditional Adventist interpretation of that is Greece is the country that says it will rule the entire earth. And at no point did it rule the entire earth. It didn't rule the portion of the earth that was known to Daniel when he made the prophecy. It didn't rule the portion of the earth that was known to Alexander the Great when they supposedly believed he did. I mean, he turned around when he got to India because he and his soldiers were tired and they were afraid of the archers on back to the elephants from the Indians, He didn't want to cross the river. He turned around and went home. When he died, he was planning an expedition to go to war with down in Saudi Arabia. So and he certainly didn't rule the entire world as we know it today. There's no way you can look at that where Greece ruled the entire world. And he goes, oh. And I said, did you never look into that? No, he says, I didn't. I guess I just took it on faith. It's like, it relates to that comment that you just put up there about when you look into these prophecies, they don't hold water. They've been told so many times, oh, wow, Daniel in the Revelation seminar, all of these prophecies came true. It proves it all. No, it didn't. It didn't happen.
Yeah, that's just incredible. And then the other interesting thing is that when people, the scholars and academics, stumble on this stuff and they know it not to be true, people like Des Ford did speak up, thinking he was given a safe environment in the October 27, 1979 forum. 1,000 people showed up. There's interest in the topic. And he says, look, I've seen behind the curtain. This actually is untrue. Proved it biblically. Well, put a a counterclaim and an alternative kind of view. And look what happened to him. And so then what happens is the other scholars and academics who also, and I interviewed them in my season 2, 86 interviews, at least 40, I reckon, would have been scholars and academics, now retired, speaking a little bit more frankly. But when faced with that evidence, they quietly go on not believing. But what stops them going, hey, I want to share that with people to help so they don't stumble into these pitfalls as well? What do you think's going on there? Again, we're asking a bit of a psychological question.
Yeah.
But have
You
you
know,
noticed that happen? Have you noticed that
yeah, it's
phenomenon?
happened. It's happened in my own family. Um, you know, I don't want to go too deep into that because I don't want to expose anyone. But yes, there are definitely cases where people no longer believe, but it is difficult. I'm going to put myself in their shoes. I'm going to imagine that it's difficult to have been ministering to people and taught these things for decades or all your life or whatever, and then go, oh, by the way, I changed positions on that. Uh, there's a good book called a great book called the title of it is actually "Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me." Uh,
And the title
and
they did.
and it's sort of on this topic of giving up beliefs. And one of the things they describe, and I'm going to butcher the story because it's been 20 years since I read the book, but it's a famous story of germ theory and how I believe it was a French gynecologist first discovered that his mortality rate for his deliveries changed dramatically when he and his staff started washing their hands. And that was the beginning of what we know now of cleanliness in hospitals and operating rooms. And it took an entire generation. People literally had to die. Doctors had to die. Young
Yeah.
doctors had no problem accepting it. Old doctors could not accept it. And he hypothesizes in the book that how hard it would be for a doctor to say, I've been a delivering babies for 40 years. I've delivered 3,000. I'm making up numbers. Uh, I could have saved 400 babies if I'd washed my hands. Nonsense. I can't accept that because it would be very hard to go, wow, I am responsible for a lot of deaths.
Yes.
And so I see the same thing in people who minister and then come to these situations where through the evidence they believe that they're no longer able to justify what they taught for so many years. Man, that's got to be hard. I have
Yeah.
great empathy for that.
Yeah, boy, that's amazing. I'm going to buy that book. I've just written it down. Here's the thing with Adventism that I'm interested in your thoughts. It doesn't break that loop. So after a whole generation, people started definitely washing their hands. Within Adventism, the whole cray-cray doctrines, the theology that damages children growing up, that puts them to sleep at night with fear blanketed all around them, the the it doesn't. So other Protestant churches seem to eventually go from this more extreme to eventually rather benign, although at the moment you could say not so. But generally speaking, the moderates you spoke of earlier bring about a bit more of a moderate collective group. But Adventism, in spite of this knowledge, generationally now, we've gone from a whole generation since Ford, several generations since 1919. Prior to that, we had Canright and Ballinger and all these guys. Um, and again, it's a bit of a psychological question, but it's important to raise. I wonder why the Adventism doesn't water down. It doesn't become more benign. In and one of the things I've resented the most from my positive progressive youth ministers raising me in the Adventist church was this false hope that it is changing. Oh, the next generation, just hang. Even Steve Wald himself, that started, left the church. I don't want to speak on his behalf, but I'm pretty sure left the belief structures of Christianity. I could be totally wrong, but either way, he used to tell me, hey, by the time I'm a pastor, I'm gonna get up further in the church, and we're gonna bring about these changes, all these great changes we see now. They demonstrably haven't occurred, but but the progressives are still offering this kind of false hope that it is going to change. Do you see Adventism ever changing? And why do you think this kind of in spite of generations of understanding that washing your hands actually is a good idea, um, why is it persisting so much within Adventism?
Well, you know, I do see, and I know that people can throw numbers that will conflict with what I'm going to say, but I'll explain this. Adventism is dying. They are more and more having to go to third world countries and have supposed mass baptisms, which may or may not be real in their own sense. If you go back 2 years later and find out how many of those 5,000 people that came to a potluck dinner because they wanted food and got baptized, how many of them are actually members? I mean, my name is still on the Adventist book. I'm still a member. No one has taken me off. I haven't cared enough to have my name taken off. The average and you're familiar with these stats because they've been published and discussed in Adventist forums for a long time. And I'm going to use the North American division, but I think it includes the Pacific that you guys are in and the European division. The average age is going up by 10 months a year.
Wow.
Well, I can tell you what happens when it goes up by 10 months a year. You see a picture of the average Adventist church in America. Oh, they're all 65, 70, 75. They're not, the kids are not signing up. That's how you get this 10 months for every year average age going
Wow.
down. So when you say, will it end? I'm not saying that it's going to die and never be around, but there's getting ready to be a real reckoning, especially since, those divisions hold, and again, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but they're only 30% of the population of the Adventist church, but they are 94% of the monetary contributions to the Adventist church.
Yes. Yeah.
Those people are not going to be around much longer to give.
That's right.
Therefore, all of the mission work in the third world country, where there is a very low level of education, which brings about a high level of superstition, that's going to be tough to maintain. So I don't see the church able to continue like it is.
Yeah, you're right. I just read a stat on that, and the interesting thing is that generation that is funding the whole church, like you say, they're baby boomers, a little bit older
Yes.
than us,
Yes.
and they are dying out, and with them will go that money. And also, and I'd say this to the gospel Adventists that are watching, this is why you need to speak up boldly to protect your Adventism, the Adventism that you call real Adventism, which I call a fortunate breakaway group. You do need to speak up because you're passing on too. A lot of you are baby boomers, and the young kids are either leaving or being I'll use a different word, or being inspired by a way more conservative movement that is growing up within the Adventist church, targeting young people very effectively. So speak up now, because you've only got another 5-10 years to get your gospel Adventism reignited into the church to have any kind of influence. So not just financially, but as far as influencing the church for what the claim is, that gospel Adventism is a better version. I even Ty Gibson, who's held up, he's an independent, Adventist guy. He did an interesting interview recently that I saw, and his claim is around the numbers you hear are like 25 million worldwide are probably more likely about 12 million in reality. And James from Academy Apologia defeating Adventism 139, I think, from memory. And there's two. There's 139A and 139. And he goes into these stats. I highly recommend people go and check out that. He goes into these stats in detail over two. And he is more assessing it's probably more likely 6 million actual Adventists going to church and not 25 million. And
I remember. You're familiar with Ronald Numbers, of course.
Yes, yeah.
Ronald Numbers used to. Of course, he had a much bigger platform than I do. But like me, he would always, when we were talking about membership numbers, he goes, "I'm still a member of the Adventist Church. I've done everything I could to get them without asking them to remove me from the book." He says, "I'm still a member because I wanted to see how long it would take before they would say, There's no way Ronald Numbers is a practicing Adventist in good standing. Look at the books he's written, and he would go, nope, I'm still on the whatever Orange County Adventist church that he belonged to. It's like he goes, if you think the numbers are real, I'm still on the books.
Yeah, classic. Yeah. Well, even Des Ford was officially on the books until about 2006, I think.
Really?
Talking about books, and look, do you mind if we just have a 5-minute break and then we'll come back?
Sure.
Because there's a few more questions here we can keep chatting about. But I just want to bring up on the screen your book. So
Yes.
that's the site earlier in the posts. Go and have a look, everyone. If you're watching on YouTube, it will disappear after the interview's gone live. I'll re-add it later.
Sure.
But in Facebook, the link's there, everyone. Go and check it out. And it's free. And so there's an audiobook version there. Is it you reading the audiobook?
Yes, it is.
I cannot. I know what I'm doing this afternoon. I'm moving from one storage unit to another storage unit at Storage King near my place, and I'm going to be listening to that while I do the lifting of the boxes. So everyone, that's it there. She said, they said, and my very special guest today is John Borton. And why have you disappeared down low there? There we go. And I'm having a really enjoyable conversation with you, John, and we will come back in 5 minutes. Those watching, if you'd like to support what I am doing, you can just do a little bit of a scan of the QR code there. It really helps. I love doing what I'm doing. I do it for free. I'm almost doing it for free as it is. But any little bit of a donation really helps. Because I'm trying to spend, I do 2 long interviews a week, and I'm trying to get this shorter one that's a reaction each week as well. Or if you'd like to go and listen to my music on Spotify, the music you were listening to at the start there is from this album called Standing at the Cross that I recorded 20 years ago. Pretty much now, 20 years ago. And that's got all my mellow kind of gospel music, I guess, and a lot of that I as I said, recorded that many years ago, but a lot of people still enjoy listening to it. So there's the link if you want to go there. Okay, so we're just going to have a short break, and we will be back with more John Borton discussion. See you in a few minutes.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again. never be the same. You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
Hi, and welcome back to SDAQ&A. My special guest today is John Borton, and we're having a great discussion about his leaving the church experience and just kind of talking all things Adventist and really drilling down on some topics. He's got a book which I just put up on the screen. I'll bring it back again a little bit later, which I'm looking forward to listening to the audio version of it later today. And we're going to go back into some more questions. Welcome back, to our second half of the program. Angela Lima wrote in response to Keith's comment about sometimes Adventists can be unkind, and yes, very unkind. And it's sad when you know someone like Angela, what an incredibly talented, beautiful, wonderful person. To imagine that she's experienced kind of unkindness is sad. And I guess a lot of denominations and movements and just people in general can be unkind. Is there something about Adventism when you look at perhaps the apologists, almost to a fault, will attack the person, not the content or the claim, which I think is a version of being very unkind? Is it more systematized, do you think, within Adventism than it is in some other movements?
I'm not sure. I mean, obviously there are universalists. There's all manner of groups, and some are more accepting than others. That's for sure. The Adventists are not one of the more accepting groups. They take that as a point of pride. That's fine. It is what it is. They think they're special. Okay, but
So
yeah,
what do
in the group that you and I are in, I have this term called the albino unicorns.
right.
And those are the people, and there are several of them in the group that they are accepting. They mean it. They don't. It's not a front. It's not a fake. I have asked those people questions. I have queried them. I have always thought that at some point I'll find that corner that they can be backed into. Haven't found it, and I try because
Yeah.
they live a very different kind of theology that is truly accepting. They don't believe that people are going to burn in the lake of fire, and they don't believe. Now, I don't believe they're right any more than anyone else. But I don't really care. It's fine with me. If you have a philosophy that helps people, I'm cool with it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a little bit touching on what we talked about before, where we go, well, if this is your own mind and you've chosen to believe this, great. But then another part of you goes, but also I do remember that that kind of ideology and theology, when passed on to young kids, is spiritual abuse. And being an older dad, it kind of weighs on my mind perhaps a
Sure.
way lot more than usual. So on the one hand, you feel a sense of a kind of like not a responsibility, but just a desire to go, hey, oh boy, that kind of thinking might lead to some spiritual abuse. And I know you don't like that. And you've got a lovely, warm, fuzzy unicorn Adventism. But so you just feel drawn to kind of say, well, maybe you need to reconsider that, because even though you've got this nice moderate Adventism, it does open up a pathway. It's like a pathway drug to to traditional Adventism.
Yeah.
Gospel Adventism is the gateway drug to,
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. I
historicist Adventism.
and of course, the moderates are often they love the word hermeneutic. I can't even say it. Hermeneutics,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
And they always go, "Oh, they're using the wrong one," and I go, "Okay," and I give them, the verses where direct command from God says you can beat your slaves if they don't die within a day or two, because they are your property. And I go, give me the interpretation that changes the meaning of that. They never do, because they
Yeah.
can't.
Well, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? There's you just can't, like with what's the guy, Anthony Magnabosco,
Yes. Street epistemology.
Street Epistemology. I love his work. I'm just quickly looking up one of his channels now, but thank you very much. Just got an extra coffee to keep me going there. Thanks, Barb. um, I love his shows because within minutes, and I've interviewed him actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I interviewed him.
That would be interesting.
During lockdown, I had another platform called Free Thinkers International, and I would interview I interviewed Dan Barker, Dan Barker's wife. Dan Barker's been on Oprah. Dan Barker's wife, Anthony Magnabosco. Am I pronouncing that correctly? And
Yes.
maybe 10 or 12 other free thinkers, agnostics, atheists, because I'm like you. I'm fascinated with what people think and why they think it, and can they defend their beliefs. And that, of course, then I gravitated to people like Anthony, who has this channel. And what fascinates me is within 5 to 10 minutes, in chatting to him, he's just very interested in people. I'll send you the link if you're interested in watching it. It's a
Of course.
fascinating conversation.
I love him.
It's great, and he sent me T-shirts and a bunch of stuff I've got just near me. Anyway, which I was just thrilled. A mug, I think, as well. But he is genuinely interested in not challenging people to get an aha moment, gotcha moment, but
Right.
more to go, well, it's actually healthy for people to think about what they believe and to challenge them in a way. And it's kind of like what I'd like doing in a way where you're not challenging someone to go, okay, I'm going to convince you not to believe that anymore, but I'm challenging you so that you can look at what you believe and maybe even get better at defending it. Because right now, Adventist apologists, you're not very good at defending it. But here's my point. Within minutes, he gets people into a corner, and you can't get the Adventist apologist into a corner. They've always got a comeback.
Yeah.
I've never come across any movement, people, ideology that is so clever at never getting put into a corner. What are your thoughts on that?
Humans are weird, as I like to say. And if someone is interested in a retort rather than upgrading their evidence, they're always going to have a retort to give. There was a famous Australian SDA preacher that used to be a member of the SDA Fight Club, and he isn't anymore. And he was just the king of, he would give you a canned message rather than actually answer the question. And breaking people out of their canned theology is important to me. I would like to challenge people to upgrade their evidentiary standards. And it's actually not that hard if you can just get someone to go, am I using the same standard for my beliefs that I demand of others?
Yeah.
Because, well, right there, you're already using a better standard than you use for yourself on the other person. The person that poo-poos the personal experience of the Muslim, well, if you're going to be evidentiarily consistent, you just poo-pooed your own.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Because their experience was just as real as yours. They are just as sincere as you were.
Yes. Yeah. So we're doing them a service by challenging.
Yes.
Now it's interesting. I'll be interviewing someone, and I think I'm pushing back, and only one interview ever have people said to me, "Oh, you went a bit hard on that person." That's my one with, I think, Emmanuel something, champion of Jesus, and I thought that's interesting because in my mind, sometimes I think I'm going quite firmly on some people, but I don't know. I'm just born with a kind of a warm face for some reason. And so people don't see that. In some ways, that's good because it means it's more of a congenial conversation, I guess. But I've seen you go really hard in Fight Club, and I love it. I even think you're doing what I'm doing, but I realize that I'm not coming across like that. Do you get pushback for that? And again, I love it. Like, don't ever stop. I tune into Fight Club, often to just see what you have written.
Yeah, I get pushback, and that's fine. I absolutely understand and agree with the fact that there are different approaches that work for different people. And generally, when I'm going the hardest, the person that I am going at it with, I know I'm not going to have any impact on them. I'm doing it for the watchers.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
I can demonstrate how flimsy the evidence is that this person is bringing to the table,
Yeah.
then the people that are lurkers, a group may have 5,000 people in it, and there's what, 100 of us that are on there constantly talking.
Yeah.
There's 4,900 people that are lurking or visiting once in a while.
Yes.
I know, I realize when someone's is so immersed in their belief that they are not willing to actually consider the evidence. I understand that, but that doesn't mean I'm going to simply let them put evidence out there and not challenge it, because there are people who are watching.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's great that there's a lot of people now doing kind of programs that are challenging people, but in the hope, the same as you, that people are watching. So often like next week, I'm interviewing a guy called Bill Gates, not the Bill Gates. And he's 83, 84. By the way, I went and saw Tom Jones last night with my
Hmm.
daughter, my
Wow.
11-year-old daughter, and
Wow.
it was just awesome. He's 84 in June, right? And he has just got it on stage still. His voice is as powerful as ever. He moving. His stories were funny. Great entertainer. Incredible band. So I encourage anyone watching in Australia. He's touring here right now. Go and see him. Um, and I say that because this guy I'm interviewing next week is still vibrant, enthusiastic, and he's what I call a real Adventist. So that's Bill Gates next Thursday. Um, and People often, when I interview people like him, they go, I can't believe that you are letting him on the platform. I can't. So do you believe in what he's saying? People struggle with this notion of, if you're chatting to someone, that you therefore, because you're giving them a platform, you therefore agree with what they're saying.
Right.
But what I'd like to suggest with SDA Fight Club, with SDAQ&A, when you watch these divergent conversations with a real variety of people, what's going on is that you get to see Adventism from a variety of perspectives. So, someone asked earlier, do you claim to be agnostic or atheist? I'm not sure if you've made a claim like that, but regardless of what your answer would be, people are getting to see Adventism from this conversation, and they can draw their own conclusions from what we're saying. When I chat next week to Bill Gates, the not famous Bill Gates, people will hear a very, very, very conservative presentation about what he thinks Adventism is. And people get to see Adventism. So the people watching on, like you say, get to go, so this is what real Adventism is. By talking to all the different kinds of Adventists, you get a sense of it. And so, as you mentioned, when you were younger, you were, you started having doubts, and then you left for many years, and then you've come back in and you're seeing Adventism again. What's your general sense of Adventism as a collective now that you're getting to actually engage with lots of Adventists? And you're in SDA Fight Club. I encourage people to go and join it. Actually, like I just saw it has just hit 5,000 members.
Yeah.
Incredible. And Peter Veach is very open for all Adventists to come in and engage with conversation, and people do. So it's not an echo chamber. So what are your thoughts now that you're back in on Adventism as a collective? You're seeing it now from all these different viewpoints. What are you noticing?
It's, I see a major struggle between culture moves on. And in spite of every generation says, oh, my church stays the same. We don't change with culture. And yet, when you look at the Adventist church today, my grandmother wouldn't recognize.
Right.
If you go to Southern University, and I can only speak to American universities, if you go and walk across the campus, the things that the students wear, they would literally have been kicked out 50 years ago. They wouldn't, culture moves religions. What was not okay becomes okay, or what was okay becomes not okay. The thing that used to be fine isn't anymore, and the thing that used to be taboo now is fine. The reason that it always appears that it's not moving to the individual is it doesn't move very quickly. It moves generationally. People have to die off for it to really, really change. And there's this battle that's going on right now, and it won't stop. It's been going on, from Can Wright and Prescott and all of them. There's always this battle of, do we change or do we not change? And women's ordination, young Earth creationism, all of this stuff. You have the General Conference, which actually controls the name, the churches, the trademarks. They are the legal entity. Go try to start a church and say it's a Seventh Day Adventist church, and have a woman pastor, and worship on Sunday or whatever you want to do. Just do it different. If it's different enough, they're going to come shut you down. So there's the battle between the corporate, I'm going to call it corporate Adventism, and the membership Adventism. And, that's been that way from the beginning. You clearly know enough about the historical Adventist church. These battles have been the same. And if the church is going to continue to change, it's especially going to change when, the baby boomers die.
Yeah. Yeah. Like when you were talking earlier about the church dying, that only really hit me last week when I watched that interview with Ty Gibson, and then the follow-up, James's Defeating Adventism 139. I'll just say it so people go and watch it. I thought, whoa, hang on a second. I thought it was growing at an exponential rate. It's actually dying. It's dying financially. It's about to have a massive hit. Like in the next 5 to 10 years, as the baby boom is gone, unless they leave all their financial legacy to the church, which some people do, it's going to really struggle. And Peter Veach wrote a little bit earlier about the hardline. Oh no, that's okay. Sorry, it's not what I was looking for. But there is, I think it's called Adventist Youth or something. The Arise group, lovely people. Not judging the people at all. I often love just watching Doug Batchelor and 3ABN, and I love the vibe. It's nice and relaxing, and it brings back some nice memories. I'm not listening to the content. It's a meditation. It's a Taoist experience. But yeah, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be some massive financial stuff going on.
Yeah, I see pictures. My mom posts pictures. She goes to all these churches that I grew up with, the different across the South, where we used to live and things like that. And it's always her and 6 other old people. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all. That's here's who attended church today. It
Yeah.
looks like a little coffee clutch.
Yeah.
It looks like people. There's just it's not going to continue.
Yeah.
And you can say, well, the church runs by faith, not by money. Sorry, faith doesn't buy you a plane ticket to go to witness in Africa.
Yeah.
You can say it does, but it doesn't.
Yeah. And it's like you said earlier, 20% of the church is paying for 100% of its functioning.
Yes. Yeah.
Neil Hush wrote earlier that you, John, as in you, are fighting against a false god. I always find that interesting when people say that, because they're inferring or implying, whatever the correct word is there, that if you were to follow the real God, you wouldn't be having this conversation with me. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would have to know, let me, going back to our albino unicorn comment, an albino unicorn would say that to me, and I'd go, well, I don't find flaws in the philosophy of your God. Doesn't mean I believe it's real, but at least I believe their God is consistent. I don't know his God, so I don't know what his point is. So I can't really comment on it. I know I'm told that over and over and over. In 99.999% of the times, it turns out I can exactly pin down the God that they think is the real God, and I can give them the exact same um, arguments that I have for the God he thinks is a fake God.
Yeah.
Is it a God of the Bible first?
Yeah. Which God?
Yeah, which God?
Which God? Yeah. And again, that's back to that thing we were saying before that, okay, what makes your supernatural claim more right than someone else's supernatural claim? It's very difficult to prove a supernatural claim, and often you've got to
Well,
go
and
on what works for you.
this is one thing that I would like to say, and it relates back to you said. I missed it in the comments. If someone asked it, they ask if I was atheist or agnostic, and you're
Right.
describing supernatural claims. If you tell me you're a deist, if you're a pure deist, okay, I don't have any argument. I don't have any case to make against your God. Don't care to make a case against your God. I would be being illogical and irrational to try to make a case against your God, because as a deist, you don't believe that God sticks his finger into the real world and stirs it around. Okay, so um, I call myself, and it depends on the group that I'm in, because labels are important shortcuts, but they're also confusing. I label myself mostly an agnostic atheist, but in some crowds, I will just acknowledge as an agnostic. The reason there's a difference there is some people believe that atheism is the positive claim that there are no gods. I don't claim that. As I like to say, there's a lot of places I haven't looked yet or been able to look. So I don't make the claim that there is no gods. Now, it is also true that another version of atheist is they have never met a claim yet that met the burden of proof. Therefore, they don't believe any of the claims that they've so far heard. Some people think that's soft atheism. Some people think that's agnosticism. So I identify as an agnostic atheist to kind of cover the broad range. Everybody's atheistic about some gods. I don't know of anybody that isn't atheistic about Thor, or Odin. Okay. So there are gods that I am atheistic about. There are gods that I am agnostic about. Agnostic just meaning, I don't know. Now, some people also, people have put their finger in my face and gone, you need to make up your mind. It's like, oh, no, I don't have to make up my mind. I can go with the evidence. And right now, the evidence for me is I don't know.
And if someone said, if you were making claims about Odin, that he didn't exist, and someone said, well, I'm choosing to believe in Odin because, if we die and he's real, then I've at least backed the winning horse. And if he's not, well, I haven't lost anything. And I think, well, you can say that about any God.
That's right. That's where Pascal's wager falls apart.
Falls apart, yeah.
It's written as if there is only one God proposition, and there's not. There's thousands of God propositions. Therefore, it falls apart in that. The fact that I am agnostic doesn't mean that I think it's a 50-50 proposition that the God of the Bible exists or doesn't exist. No, it's not anything close to that.
When I interviewed Dan Barker, he used the word plausible in a very similar way you've just answered your beliefs. He said he was very similar, and he just added that he just finds belief in Odin or Thor or the God of the Bible is just not a very plausible claim. And there's people who definitely believe. Well, like what's interesting is people will believe that there's fairies living down the back garden. Literally, I know people that believe in fairies in the backyard that are down there, and they'll have little offerings that they give in a plate for these fairies.
Yeah.
And when we laugh at that, but they truly believe that, and they're normal accountants and lawyers and live their life like anyone else. So we laugh at it, but we don't like people laughing at our similar claim that, Jesus went from one place of the part of the sanctuary to another part of the sanctuary and is coming back any day. So,
Yeah,
Um,
I was with a family member, and they said something about they really hated Tom Cruise, and I was like, "Why do you hate Tom Cruise?" Because the conversation was a movie or something, and it's like this was an SDA family member, and he's like, "Well, it's because of his religious beliefs," and I go, "Well, what do you know about his religious beliefs?" And they're like, "They're weird," and I go, "Are they any more weird than symbolic, ritualistic, symbolic cannibalistic rituals?" And she's like, No, that would be really weird." I go, communion.
yeah, yeah,
Every 13th Sabbath.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, we always think that the other stuff is weird and that ours is
It's not
normal.
weird. Yeah,
Yeah, ours is not weird. Theirs is
yeah,
weird.
yeah.
It's
I
like,
know.
no,
Yeah.
no, that's pretty weird. That's really freaking weird.
When you grasp that, you don't take people criticizing your beliefs personally anymore because you realize, yeah, I'm just as weird as you.
Yes, that's
To
just weird.
the next person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm going to read a couple more comments and ask some questions that are in the post in the feed, sorry, and then I want to close with us chatting a little bit about the investigative judgment and what your thoughts were when you stumbled into that kind of bunch of cray cray. And I just because you said earlier you'd read so much Ellen White, and lately I have been too, because I'm trying to really tease apart what is the IJ, because most Adventists have some kind of, it's like you cannot put them in the corner to give a definitive answer on it. That's why I'm hoping my interview with Bill Gates next week. He's a real black and white. He will say what, and his Adventism is what the remnant Adventists actually are. He's going to give us a really good account of what real Adventism's call, the reason they came into being. He's going to be great with that. He's someone that definitely is not going to try and go, oh, well, Jesus did this. If we follow that, we can become this. And all. He's not one of those kind of apologists. So I'm looking forward to that. So we'll just go to some comments. Then I want to come back to your thoughts on the IJ, particularly time of trouble, probation, standing without an intercessor. Does Ellen White back up these cray views? Have we got a leg to stand on to say this is what Adventist whole mission is? Whether you believe it now or not, there's a weighty amount of evidence to suggest that is Adventist's true calling. So we'll come to that to close in a minute. But there's some great little questions and comments. Fred, hey Fred, is it Simmons or Simons? I'd say Simmons, Fred Simmons. He talked about Hagar before, and I said, can you elaborate? So he has. Abraham lost me when he loaded Hagar up with food, water, and put an 11-year-old boy on her back, led her into the desert, and left her for the wolves and hyenas. And when he lied about Sarah being his wife. Okay, that's what he was saying earlier. What are your thoughts on that? Might take it as a comment.
Don't really have any.
But yeah, I can see, Fred, why you started going, hang on a second. I don't know if I want to put my name to that. This is interesting. I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. And hey, George, hope you're still watching. Great to have you watching today. I just saw this on the news. I love watching American politics, John. Every day, I reckon
Boy, you can
I'm
get your
watching it at least an hour or two a day. I hope my wife's not watching. I just am obsessed with what's going on. I just love from that street epistemology perspective. So Trump's released this Bible, and George has said a funny thing here. Trump is offering a discount on his Bible for those who commit to reading it, starting with 2 Corinthians. What are your thoughts on, we don't have to do, that's a whole other kind of rabbit hole there, but what's going on in America at the moment from a Christian perspective? And there seems to be some pushback against, I definitely don't want to get into this deeply, but there's a pushback against the kind of Israel, the Jewish kind of contingent. There's some real polarization going on. What's your John Borton nutshell view of how Christians are behaving at the moment there?
Yeah, well, my nutshell is the average age of Trump supporters is going up about the same, as the average age of the members of the Adventist Church. The support for him is the evangelical baby boomers. So his movement is not going to last a long time because they're going to die.
Right.
I don't understand how the evangelicals have hooked their wagon to a strip club owning, casino owning philanderer. I don't understand that, other than to say he has learned how to speak to them. I like to use the phrase "followers will follow." Followers are gonna follow, and boy, he knows how to lead them around.
Mm, mm.
I
What
don't
what
I don't understand it.
What about the whole bunch of the young people like Candace Owens and Turning Point USA, with the variety of speakers that they have? Is it Michael Knowles and a bunch of others that seem to be really taking the young people by storm? Like there's a real. I might be
Me,
wrong. That's why I'm interested in your
yeah,
thoughts. But it seems to be
yeah,
not just the baby boomers.
yeah. There's not a uh, you look at the big camera view of a Trump rally, and the average age is high. That doesn't mean there aren't youngsters. There's
Right.
youngsters in the Adventist church,
Yeah.
but the average age is 50s, 60s. It's not young people.
Right. So your Turning Point USA kind of movement is really more just we're getting the viral kind of images,
Yeah.
therefore getting the impression that it's more widespread than it is.
Yes.
Right, right, right.
Now, that doesn't make it any less dangerous in the next election in the next 4 years.
Mm.
I don't understand how we ended up with the candidates we have. I can't stand any of them. It's a mess. Why we can't come up with better candidates, I don't know.
It is fascinating. It is fascinating. Australia has a system like we still have kind of more moderate versions of. So in some ways we're lucky to you've got a more Adventist kind of group expanding there. Moderation has not prevailed, perhaps some would say.
Yeah.
Stephen has written again and again. Steve, you started writing your link earlier to your website, but it didn't come through. So maybe just type that in again if you're still with us. This is an interesting one. I'm interested in your thoughts on. He's asking you, John, if there were evidence that you could accept that the God of the Bible was true, would you follow him?
Not as written in the Bible, no. I mean, I can give you plenty of examples that are absolutely, if the God of the Bible, as written in the Bible, and as represented by his followers, is true, I will not bend a knee because he's a tyrant.
Would
Just take the Ten Commandments. The first four of them are completely egocentric. There's not one in there that says don't own another human as property, but the first four are, you need to worship me. Don't have any other gods before me. All of these things. He had a chance to give 10 rules for life, and four of them involve his ego. No.
And there's two versions of the Ten Commandments there as well, I think. Yeah. Angela Lima wrote earlier, I can't bring it up onto the screen, I can't find it, but I paused it on the feed. She mentioned earlier when I said a lot of the academics and scholars aren't necessarily speaking up, and she said, and yet some pastors do denounce the heresies like Mark Martin and Dale Ratzlaff, and that's true. And boy, Dale Ratzlaff started an incredible movement. They would call it a ministry that has positively affected Adventists who are kind of questioning incredible amounts. I recently went to the former Adventist Fellowship there in Loma Linda and had the most amazing weekend. And met Colleen Tinker, and they were playing some video clips of Dale. And I encourage people to go and check out their former Adventist Fellowship ministry there online, because if you're questioning stuff, they publish so many different books, and Dale Ratzlaff books. I'm just looking over here because I've got a few just a bit out of reach, but there's some incredible books that I'd recommend people read, like Whiteout, I think it's called. There's a whole bunch that just aren't coming to mind at the moment. I've asked Angela Lima to join me for an episode where we just hold up books that we've found inspirational, and a lot of them have come from the Dale Ratzlaff Assurance Ministries, etc. So yes, you're right, Angela. Those guys did speak up, and I'm glad they did. Here's a longer one there from Keith. If you are looking for verses with which to support slavery, you will find them. If you're looking for verses with which to abolish slavery, you will find them. If you're looking for verses with which to oppress women, you will find them. If you are looking for verses with which to liberate or honor women, you will find them. If you're looking for reasons to wage war, you will find them. If you're looking for reasons to promote peace, you will find them. If you're looking for an outdated, irrelevant, ancient text, you will find it. That's an interesting thought. Any comments on that?
Yeah, no, he's exactly right. I don't say that the Bible says one thing. The Bible says a multitude of things, many of them contradictory. And that's he's really stated a very accurate position. I would only add that a God who decided, if you were leaving your child a book with which to find their way to be with you, if you were leaving, uh, a 5-year-old, I'm exaggerating because they're not very good at writing, but a very young person could write a book that is more clear than that book. And so one of the great things that I was able to conclude that helped me understand the Bible is when I realized that it was just a bunch of guys writing about what they saw within the context of the knowledge that they had at the time. Once you do that, the Bible makes a whole lot more sense. I mean, just the fact that the Old Testament, the difference in the Old Testament and the New Testament, in the Old Testament, it was brutal tribalism. If the tribe got sick, it was because some guys from your tribe went over to their tribe and danced around the wrong idol, and you got a spell cast on you. That was just the culture of the day. And the Old Testament is written in this brutal tribalism culture of the day. God told us to go kill, and so we went and killed. And when you get to the New Testament, which isn't nearly so openly violent, there's still a lot of overt. But now you had culture. There were cities with governments. The Romans had established, and the Greeks and all that had established more governments, and so you begin to have more people getting along. Not to say that it still wasn't brutal, with crucifixions every day and so on and so forth. But if you read the Bible in the context of the time, to me, it just makes I don't have a real problem understanding where they're coming from anymore. But if you take it as the truth of a God giving you a path, it's like, oh, it doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah. The New Testament is a more moderate version, like we talked about earlier. Cindy Lou has written I think quite a nice little comment on sin. The definition, translation of sin, is missing the mark. That kind of removes the evil component and makes it more about just perhaps wrong decisions and right decisions that benefit a group cohesiveness and groupthink morality. She also adds, George, don't go there, when we're talking about the Trump book. Right. Steve Jackson clarifies, and I didn't realize, Steve, that you were having a beef, but I was just taking beef with his idea that stories are not evidence. Sure, we need additional evidence, but stories are a form of evidence. And I think John's already answered that, probably since you wrote that there, Stephen. So yeah, there's no denying that stories are a form of evidence, but in the context we were talking about, the person was claiming that the stories for him are the evidence. Someone's put up, Trump is offering a disc. Oh no, that we've already read that one. Are there any other messages there that are kind of jumping out to you? I'll just bring up Steve again. Peter, it is all about credibility of the source. There is more evidence to support the credibility of the Holy Scriptures than anything else. The Bible actually explains false gods. I think we've probably covered that one.
You have to have a very low standard of evidence to believe that that's true. What he just wrote.
And what's the saying? You know, if you've made an extraordinary claim, you need extraordinary evidence to back it. Something like that.
If you have a low enough standard of evidence that that statement becomes true, then the Quran is also true. You know, the Book of Mormon is also true. Every other religious belief is true.
That's right. Faith can be used to support any belief claim.
Yeah.
And you know that's why I find when I've interviewed people that have what I call this gospel Adventism, that there's something culturally about it and nice and happy Sabbath, and you go to church and there's a friendly community, and that watered down version of Adventism, which I don't think is true Adventism or real Adventism, but it's a nice watered down moderate version. You can actually have a really wonderful life in your small local community as long as the pastors are on board and the youth leaders are providing nice, safe space. And the danger is that unless that kind of gospel Adventism, if that's what people want to promote and believe, unless it's supported by its leaders with bold claims of, hey, this is why I believe in my moderate Adventism, because I think it's healthier for the community, it's healthier for your mind and body. That's why I think they need to say it a bit more, to shout it from the rooftops a bit more, to protect it, because it's going to be gone. And you know, I get pushed back because I think I interviewed someone the other week. It's just gone from my brain, but we were discussing, even gospel Adventism is bad, but or has problems, but that's true. But I'd rather be raised in a gospel Adventist family than the kind you were raised in. That was just incredibly extreme. And maybe you'd agree with that. I'm not sure. Diana Ramos has written, I had to leave the South for healing, and the fact I just couldn't handle any more of the blasted heat and humidity. Give me see. That's obviously just a different comment there about where she's from. Okay, let's finish off with your thoughts on the IJ, the investigative judgment. At a young age, when did you first encounter time of trouble, probation? I want you to try and bring in some of your memories of what you actually read from Ellen White. And,
Right.
And I do want to come onto this one that's hardly ever talked about, but is actually the point of why Adventisms began, to this stand alone without an intercessor to vindicate God, prove Satan's claims as being wrong, that you can't keep the commandments without Jesus kind of mollycoddling you through it, to vindicate God, prove Satan wrong, to the angels and the other worlds watching. I think that is the seed of what I would say is Adventism's downfall, because it's totally not biblical, but it is also the seed of the whole reason Adventism grew into being. So I want to just drill down, if you can. Most people don't even really know about it, wash it away, don't want to talk about it. Oh, yeah, Jesus will work it out. No. The standing without an intercessor is ground zero germ for me. And
And you know, and I'm not I'm not a psychologist that can get into Ellen White's brain. There's been a lot of stuff written, but I do know she very strongly reacted to, and it is clear that she overreacted to Catholicism. She believed that was the true enemy, and Catholicism. You go to the priest. You don't go directly to God. You don't. You go to confession. There's a middleman in the Catholic Church, and I think some of this response from her was a way to completely separate. We have to be separate from the Catholic Church. We have to be uniquely different. And so, I don't know, as we know, most of her theological ideas, she, especially in her younger days, didn't come from her. they miraculously appeared in her writings 2 weeks after someone else had written a church bulletin, with this writing in it. But I think she grabbed onto anything she could about. That's where the big time of trouble. The investigative judgment. Well, the investigative judgment was purely a response to how many times are we going to be wrong about when the date that we give, and it's like, well, we have to turn it from it's really happened to do something that happened up there that we can't prove or disprove. It's a story that's created to cover the book that I mentioned, Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. Starts out with another similar to an Adventist story where they've predicted the end of the world, and it doesn't come, and it doesn't come, and it doesn't come, and how people actually become more set in their ways about it than less set in their ways, even when they've just been proven wrong 3 times in a row. And given the history of the SDAs coming from the Millerites, I describe the founders of the SDA Church as the last people standing in a gullibility contest, because over and over, William Miller had tried twice already, or was it 3 times, to place a date, and it hadn't worked out. And so people were like, I'm leaving. And this small group that formed the SDA Church were the last people standing saying, he was right. Well, he was kind of right. It's just the thing he described was wrong. Now we're going to call this, investigative period. We've entered the investigative period. And of course, she taught the shut door policy as plain as day. As of that date, no one else is getting in. Then she had kids. Well, my kids surely can get in, and so pretty soon that whole shut door policy just drifted away. She never disowned it, but never said another word about it. And so, yeah, there's a number of Adventist theological positions that were just formed kind of out of odd scenarios that were used to justify actions that were made based on this belief of William Miller.
So in your upbringing, which was very traditional Adventist, do you recall having stories told you about the time of trouble, Sunday law, probation closing, and share some of them?
The entire reason I couldn't go to school, wasn't allowed to go to school, was because of the time of trouble. Time was too short. Most people don't realize that, Ellen White, she didn't marry James for a couple of years because after the investigative judgment, after the judgment started, it was weeks and Jesus was coming. Okay. Then it stretched into months. Well, there's no reason to get married. She said people shouldn't marry and have kids. She says that in her writings because time is too short. Well, then she marries and has kids. Then, when schools opened, when Loma Linda, the forerunner to Loma Linda opened, for instance, she wouldn't allow even 2-year curriculum taught. Time is too short. Few months, get them out. One thing that Ellen White was very consistent about, and if you read her works and her letters to people and her positions, if you look at it through the lens of time is running out and we may have only weeks or months before the return, which was her position, a lot of her actions that seem really, really weird make perfect sense. Yeah. Her positions on segregated churches, which is abhorrent in thought now with racism. Okay. But it was done because, time is too short for us to take that issue on. I don't believe there's a lot of evidence that I can give that she was not a racist person.
Yeah.
But she did believe that was an argument that look, let's not try to fight that fight. Let's have black churches and white churches, because then they can train people up and they can get people out in the field, and the blacks will minister to the blacks and the white will minister to the whites, because we don't have time. Jesus is coming pronto. And so a lot of her stuff is understandable if you look at it from that perspective. She was wrong, of course, but it's understandable.
Yeah. Boy, that's well said. And they thought, again, that Jesus was returning 7 years after 1844, October 22, 23, 1851, and she said before that, what you guys have had years to prepare, what we've had years to prepare for, you will only have months.
That's right. Correct.
So yeah, that's 1851. So putting that as a thread through everything she said certainly helps you understand what was going on way more clearly.
Yes.
And so Adventism is kind of in a perpetual date setting by saying soon,
Yes.
imminent. Imminent is what they really mean. And the traditional Adventists, the real Adventists, are getting ready, and that's any day. They still believe that, and that's what they're promoting. And the gospel Adventists are going, hey, anytime, in God's time. I wrote
Yeah.
a song called,
Yeah.
I'll be waiting. 1,000 years is not too long, So I was that guy
Yeah.
as well.
You know,
But
and
it's an endless loop.
yeah, and that gets us to the harm. I have two extremely bright sisters. One of them wanted to be a doctor. One of them wanted to be a veterinarian. Both of those require extensive schooling. They never got to be doctors. They never got to be veterinarians because they weren't allowed to go to school. Because there isn't time for someone to become a doctor. There isn't time for someone to become a veterinarian. There isn't time. We can't have that. We have to go out right now, out on the street, door to door, witnessing. And that's what I grew up doing.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said earlier, even the moderate Adventists are perpetuating that myth by not
Yes.
speaking out about it enough.
Yeah. I mean, my grandmother, my great grandmother, I remember my great grandfather, but not my great grandmother. But my grandmother, oh, of course Jesus was going to come in her lifetime.
Yeah.
My mother, of course Jesus is going to come in my lifetime. I guess you can go back 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And,
So,
pretty soon doesn't mean that. Ellen White made it clear that there were people, the famous food for worms statement, where people were going to be alive. Well, that's just staying in the exact vein of what Jesus said. Where some here will not taste death. It's not just Adventists. It's just been going on for an extremely long time.
And I'd suggest that the difference between the Jesus saying of that and the Ellen White saying of it is that Ellen lived on to be able to say, oh, he didn't come back because you guys aren't living the actual proper truth.
Of course.
Whereas Jesus was saying, when you finally grasp that the kingdom of heaven is within, then that return has occurred. So you can kind of at least find a way for those who are
You can
saying,
always
well,
find a way.
Jesus even said he's coming soon. Yeah, he was meaning, when you grasp this concept of coming soon, I am already here. The kingdom of God is within already. When you grasp that, then I have returned. Whereas with Adventism, you can't do that.
You can justify. Well, they do though. Don't underestimate the ability of humans to justify the phrase they believe in, because the example you just gave of Jesus is literally just a justification. Because if you take that excuse in the context of what he said, the two don't reconcile.
Yeah, exactly. And then what interests me is when a lot of the progressive Adventists are like shocked with last generation theology apparently seeping into Adventism in recent years. They're shocked about it. And I think, have you not read any of Ellen G. White's writings, from early writings to when she died? This idea of, well, you guys just weren't ready enough and you didn't follow the three angels message is satisfactorily enough, and that's why Jesus hasn't returned. That is last generation theology. There's thousands of quotes that she says that support last generation theology. Why are they so shocked that
most of them haven't read A.G. White?
Right. Yeah.
This is the thing, and it's true of the Bible and Ellen White. People, they're fed canned theology, and they can quote the verses that they hear from the pulpit, but they don't actually read it and compare it and ask questions about it, because that's literally what made, when I left, my first reason to leave was not because I believed there wasn't evidence for his existence. I became absolutely convinced that I couldn't worship this person. There's no way I could worship this person, real or not. I wasn't going to worship someone that describes in detail, directly from the mouth of God, how to distribute 32,000 young virgin girls whose parents had just been slaughtered. I want you to kill them all, but save the young virgin girls for yourselves. I can't worship that God. I just can't.
Yeah.
Won't do it.
Yeah.
Real or not, I won't do it. I won't bow my knee to that person. How about not kill them? How about just not kill them?
Yeah.
Instead of you can kill them, but save the young virgin girls. And we're not talking 2 virgin girls or 3 virgin girls. It's very specific in the Bible. 32,000 young virgin girls. So imagine if there's that many of the girls. Imagine how many boys, moms, how many got killed. Hundreds of thousands were killed. Prisoners of war, not combatants. Prisoners of war were killed. And so my path didn't start out with, wow, I don't believe in God. No, it started out with, that's not a God I can worship. That's not a God I can respect. It's not a God that I can't believe exists. It's that, I'm sorry, that's an immoral thug.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was that many. I've just read The Virgins, but I recently went to Paul McCartney concert, he's 81. Fantastic concert, and there were literally 35,000 people at the venue. So in my mind, I just went to that number. As I looked around, I suddenly had a scale of, it was massive number of people, and yet here you go, they're yours now.
And he gave specific instructions as to how many went to which tribes, how many the high priest got. Here's the number that the high priest gets. It's very specific.
And people will say, well, he had to speak the language of the people at the time. But to me, that's a good opportunity to go, I'm going to speak your language, but hey, instead of taking 32,000 virgins, how about we don't take any? Sure, go off and kill the guys and the animals and every living thing, but let's just leave those, and normally you'd kill all the virgins too, but how about, I'm just adding a nice little new thing for you to ponder. We don't kill 32,000 young girls.
Yeah, but even that, God was not shy. He told them not to wear mixed fabrics. It's like, he was careful. He had to speak to. No, he told them all kinds of things not to do. Don't eat shellfish. Don't wear mixed fabrics. That God was perfectly capable of telling them what he didn't want them to do. And he didn't mind them dividing up 32,000 versions. He told them exactly how to do it. So I can't worship that God.
What are your thoughts on if you tease out so come to the New Testament, come just to the 4 Gospels, come just to the teachings of Jesus, miracles, parables, stories as allegories. How do you find that Jesus? So take away the supernatural, take away the miracles, take the teachings of Jesus in the 4 Gospels. Do you find them to be reasonably good life leading pieces of advice and teaching?
There are good things that it is claimed that he taught. But in the end, what he says is, love me and do as I say, or my daddy's going to come down and torture you and kill you. In the end, that's what he says. So,
is that what he says, or is that what Paul says he says later on? Like in the 4 Gospels, can you find that?
Well, that's one of the interesting things. People go, no, Jesus never talked about hell. It's like, what do you mean? Look at the Beatitudes. Look at the Sermon on the Mount. He talks about hell right then. Okay, so you don't have to go outside the red letters, as we call them. Referring to a red letter Bible. You don't have to go outside of what he says. Yes, you can find, just like everything about the Bible, because it's one big conflicting document. You can find where he says, love your neighbor, but he also says, you have to hate your family and follow me. You have to hate your family, your mother, your sister, your brother. You have to hate them.
Mm.
It's like, okay,
Mm.
where's all this lovey-dovey stuff coming from? Yes, he
Mm.
does say lovey-dovey, but you have to ignore the part that he says the conflict where he says ugly things.
Mm. And not to push the point, but he quite possibly, and I've got no backup to this other than I've heard other people say this. I haven't gone to source material, but that he may have spent some time working in his lost years on the Silk Road there, where he met a lot of people traveling through that were bringing different ideas from China, India, because some of his teachings, like the Golden Rule, is kind of directly from some Taoist teachings. There's a few other kind of Eastern religion beliefs coming through. A lot of what the Eastern religions do is say things that are quite yin yang opposite to confront thoughts. If you know the Tao, you don't know the Tao. There's some really so I'm just wondering, thinking out loud, not planned this side, not that any of our conversation has been planned, but I wasn't thinking of going here. Do you think he may have been speaking in those kind of frames as well, and people have just not understood that he was what are they called? Not room. There's a
I,
word
I think
for it.
the answer. I think the answer to that question is we don't know.
Right.
I mean, what you're saying relates very much to a comment that I'm looking up right now to my right,
Right.
which says it's by Neil Hush, and it says John still sounds like an SDA taking text too literally. I don't completely disagree with what he's saying there. But once you start saying, well, maybe he met some people, and I'm pointing to your side of the screen now is the reason I'm using my finger here. I probably shouldn't do that because it confuses people. Once you start saying, well, did he meet some Eastern religion and was he talking? The answer to that question is we will never know.
Yeah.
So if you decide to start interpreting, which everyone has done, if you decide to start interpreting when he was really saying what he meant and when he was in some guessing mode, then you'll never know if you're right or wrong.
Mm.
You just have to say, I don't know. And that's my answer. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. When looked through that lens, some of what he says to me makes more sense, but totally contradicts what goes on to become the gospel message. I read the Tao Te Ching a few times over the last few years, not to become a follower of it, but because I'm just interested in, what's out there and what are people saying they believe in, etc. And it turns out that it's not actually a book that's making any spiritual claims at all, though uh, people have in later years have turned it into a religion. But when you read it, it's got some very similarities to the Book of Thomas, which didn't make it into the canon,
Right.
but like 101 teachings of Jesus kind of thing. There's a really similar kind of lots of conflicting comments just to make you think. And the Tao Te Ching really is just about ideas and teachings to how to live a better life, and about kind of waking up to reality. Whoever decides what that is, who knows? But just an interesting aside. I found that when I then read through the four Gospels and the teachings of Jesus, I could see, some of those kind of paradoxes. The kingdom of God is within, but then talking about a return and a literal translation into heaven. And and it's a real mix of people are writing about Jesus to confirm his existence, and some truths of Jesus getting in there as well. There's a conflict there too, because like Matthew possibly wasn't Matthew. It's someone else writing, and Matthew spends like 4 or 5 chapters. The first 4 or 5 chapters is just there to kind of say what I'm about to say confirms that this is the Messiah, and it goes through all these deep explanations, and then finally you come to the Sermon on the Mount. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside there. It doesn't really affect the flow of the conversation. But sometimes it's interesting to just drill a bit deeper into what was Jesus actually saying.
Yeah, I'm I'm not sure why we have such a fascination with trying to sort out what someone meant
Yeah,
when there's literally no way to ever know.
yeah.
You
Well,
know,
that's what I like about the Tao Te Ching is they're not claiming that you need to work out what they said. It's like it's something like 400 years before Christ that it was, and they're not even claiming that it's Lao Tzu that wrote it. It might be a collective that took quite a long period of time to be gathered together. But there's no claim that you have to read into it. There's no reinterpretation of it in a way that justifies your belief, if that makes sense.
right,
So it's one of the few ancient texts that I've read that I found quite refreshing because it wasn't telling me to believe something or justify it or bend your brain around certain concepts, other than there are
right.
things written to make you think.
So let's take just a little bit of pushback to you on something that you were presenting when I was describing the love your neighbor, but you must hate your family and come with me.
Yeah,
I never see what I always see is everybody tries to justify the hateful one to
yeah,
reconcile with the kind one. Well, how do we know he wasn't a complete jerk?
yeah,
And
yeah,
that we're supposed to, and his "be nice to your neighbor" was totally metaphorical, didn't mean what he actually said. No, we always take that one to mean what it says, and we
yeah,
try to
yeah.
justify the other one. Well,
That's right.
I'm not saying which one is true. All I'm saying is why I always see it one way and never the other.
Yeah, yeah,
And why? Why? It's because for some reason, culturally, we want to believe he was good. So therefore, we're going to take, we're every time you say something good, yeah, that's good. Every time you say something bad, oh, out of context,
yes,
out of
yes, yeah,
context.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, well, how about the good one? How do you know that one's in context? Well, I don't really care if that's in context or not. I
yeah,
like it. If we
yeah,
don't like it, it's out of context.
yeah. No, I like to push back on that because I think when you leave Adventism and you try to find out what on earth about it can I at least feel like there's some sense of, ultimately there's no necessary meaning. Like I don't believe that we are who we are now because of all the terrible things we've been through, other than, yeah, that's true. Not that it makes it any more special. It's just that, yep, I've had things happen and I am the person I am. Cool. I don't see it as this because of all the bad things. I'm this person I am now, if that makes any sense. But I have tried to go, well, what on earth was I filtering my worldview on? And so I then deconstructed a lot of things, and then I came down to, well, surely there's some good stuff that Jesus said that I can go, well, that's some good stuff. But then what I
Right.
did find is there's a lot of good things that a lot of people have said. So in some
Correct.
ways, you become a cherry picker without having to go, I'm not even worrying about the context, but here's some things that resonate with me that do make me feel like I'm contributing to community, being a better person, better father, better community member, finding areas that are moral based on how we all agree in whatever context we're in.
And
And
I
so,
I treat
so yeah, I have gone, look, Jesus said this. I don't like that he said that. I'll therefore say that that must be Matthew writing. Matthew's putting his spin on it, and that's contextual. But I do like what he said about the golden rule, so I'm going to reinforce that. So I do,
yeah,
yeah, I do
it's
that.
interesting. In my progress, I would describe myself. There was a 10-year period when I would say I am not Christian, but I believe in a lot of the Christian principles. And then what I discovered is these aren't Christian principles. They're principles that were around long before, love your neighbor, golden rule, all that stuff. That's not unique to Christianity. Cultures all over the world that have never heard of Christianity have developed similar sorts of things. I mean, morals came about. There are strong evolutionary reasons for I need to get along with my neighbors a lot more back in the old days than there
Mm,
is now. Because in the
mm,
old days, you get eaten by a freaking saber-toothed tiger if you didn't have friends to back you up. So,
You needed reciprocal altruism.
right. I realized that what I was saying as Christian principles, they're adopted by Christians, and I'm glad they adopted them. And Jesus says some fine things, but I don't attribute them to him because they've been around long before he was.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what I was saying about the Tao Te Ching. 400 years beforehand, here's a book where the actual author is saying, don't go looking at anything supernatural. These are the things that will help you have a better life as teachings. And he wasn't relying on supernatural. He wasn't relying on any of that stuff, but had still come up with these ideas,
And
and
actually, I think that point you made will bring up an easy way for me to wrap up what I have to say. And that is, I discovered that every bit of effort that I put into the people around me paid back in spades. Being good to the people around me, helping the people around me, it brought me results, 1,000-fold to what I put into it. The effort I put into the angels dancing on the pins, the exact investigative judgment theology, or, what Ellen White says about this or thinks about that, or the biblical twists of whether maybe Jesus was saying, hate your parents or hate your family for some weird. I didn't get any return on that investment. None. Okay, where does it get me? It doesn't get me anywhere. And so I decided to put my effort into the people around me. And it changed my life. They say, what is there to lose by, believing, theism? And it's like, well, you can lose a whole lot of time that you could be using for something else.
Yeah.
And once I got past the fear of judgment and the fear of the time of trouble and the fear of hell and the fear of, whatever version, the lake of fire, eternal, not eternal, hell is separation from God. Once I get any version you want to take, once I got over that fear, I was able to focus on doing the best right now in this life for the people around me. And I've never, the paybacks that I have received from that literally have changed my life. People have done things for me. I wouldn't be the same person I am without the people that were around me. I like to say who you hang out with matters. And how so that's kind of the philosophy that I have lived with.
I'm glad. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
For the last, long period is I no longer care about the details of, it's like the whole Des Ford thing. Okay, so Des is another guy who interpreted differently than somebody else. Well, there's a million of those guys, It doesn't help me at all be kind to the people around me.
No. And I think in the journey to that point, it's a little bit like brain surgery. Once the tumor is removed, you can look back and go, oh, I'm glad I'm here. But as you were having the operation and the deconstruction, those things were important. And in some ways, why you're having the conversation within SDA Fight Club, so people watching on might get to the point where you're at. And I think I was going to say too, with my thoughts on Taoism, that after even exploring that stuff, I stepped back and thought, well, what is going on inside my emotions, my feelings, me now separate to these things? What am I actually responding to from a more, this is my primate position. This is my primal thoughts. These are the feelings that are coming to me as I interact with people. And all of a sudden, all the other teachings just disappeared. And I felt like I was going, well, what does matter to me? And I didn't suddenly go into this, oh, well, I'm a hedonist and I'm just going to go and, kill everybody and be extremely sinful. And I suddenly went into this space which I think you're describing, where you suddenly care about community, you care about what's happening right now with your interactions with people. And where I'm going with it, you can actually listen to yourself and go, this is a good thing to do, this is not a good thing to do, not necessarily based on anyone's findings or teachings or claims or books or scriptures. You can just kind of have this
Yeah.
knowledge of how to behave morally
Yeah.
if you just listen to that little quiet
I,
primal voice.
yeah. I'm not going to pray for you, but what do you need? You need a ride into town?
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
do you
yeah,
need a few bucks? Are you hungry? What do you need?
yeah,
That's what I'll do.
yeah. And in a weird way, your life becomes smaller but more meaningful, because you think, oh, I'm going to grow some potatoes in my backyard, and boy, that, I'd love to. What's it like to grow tomatoes, and listen to my daughters jumping on the trampoline outside, and knowing that after this interview we'll go out and hang out a bit. They're both home today, and yeah, it's kind of takes you to a core of something. I don't know if you've read The Moral Animal by Robert Wright.
I have
But
not.
he talks about how humans, the mammal human, um, is kind of going to head towards moral decision making, regardless of what belief claims they pronounce around it. And quite often, he talks a lot about Darwin. He uses Darwin as kind of his example of being a moral animal. And even though he kind of brought around such an incredible change in people's worldview about evolution with his books and whatnot, he still struggled with his own kind of moral dilemmas and crises, and had to think through stuff, and wanted approval, and then would wonder, why am I seeking this kind of approval? Then would assess it from well, I'm a mammal, so why would a mammal want to do that? And it's interesting when you explore it from that perspective. And then I kind of think, if people then at least get to that point and then want to construct something, I call that almost an absence of a worldview and an existence in reality. And if people then want to build on that, a framework that helps offer them some kind of template that just kind of defines them a little bit, okay, that's fine. But there's something refreshing about going into nothingness and just waking up as I am a mammal. And then where you go from there, I think, can be positive, whether you then reconstruct some form of gospel Adventism, or if you need to go into some Eastern thing, or, I mean, I'm going to get shot for saying these kind of things, but sometimes a total deconstruction can lead to a healthy reconstruction, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, man, what a conversation. Incredible. We're getting into record lands here, 3 hours conversation. And I think Matthew Cortman and Bob Brinsmead himself, the man who in many ways is at the center of all Adventist kind of hotspots.
Yeah, you Australians were always throwing us SDAs into chaos over there. We had as a child, I just remember Brimsmead was the devil.
Yeah. Well, I've interviewed him twice, and I think both interviews were 3.5 or 4 hours, and he has gone on some interesting journeys with thought, and is the culprit at every ground zero point of Adventism, conservatism to liberal theology.
Yeah, as a child, I just remember, these names as a young person. It was like, oh, Brimsmead, oh, shivers. Brimsmead was to me like, the Pope was to Ellen White. Oh, just the thought.
And it's funny that here in Australia we had all of those kind of dissidents are Aussies, and yet all the Andreessen fans, the real the Concerned Brethren, also Aussies. And from my town, pretty much 90% of your Concerned Brethren, real fundamentalists, went to church in one of the churches in my town. And literally Des Ford and a bunch of these kind of Bob Brinsmead studied up here. These guys all were in the other literal church. So within my town of Currumbong, Avondale, lived the ground zero guys that have affected the whole of Adventism.
Yes. Yeah.
I wonder
No, it was,
why it's such an Aussie thing.
well, I'll have to concede that I don't necessarily claim to have a broad view. My view comes from the Peters Group, which is dominantly Australian, and I was actually pretty stunned when I joined that group.
Which group?
Pleasantly,
Peter Veitch's SDA Fight Club. Yep.
yes, I was pleasantly surprised. At least the group that frequents that group, the people that frequent that group are very much more independent thinkers than we seem to have here in the U.S. Now, it
That's
just may be the
interesting.
nature of the group.
You know what's interesting? SDAQ&A, the majority members are USA.
Interesting.
And are they going, what's going on here? And using us as a resource to find out about the kind of Aussie conservatives and the Aussie liberals and the battle, because it is ground zero. So if you're interested in Adventist theology, SDA Fight Club and SDA Q&A are kind of having the place for discussion on that. Not to trumpet my own group or anything like that, but hey, well, we'll leave it there. Quick couple of comments just to close off. I really do enjoy all these different points of view. It's actually very healing for me. That's Diana Ramos. Thank you. And there's a few comments there coming through about the intercessor. I did want to chat a bit more about that, but I think we've concisely painted a picture of where you have gone, where you've come from, your journey, and where you've landed. And I think it's a good place to leave it there. Just having a quick browse to see. I love our conversations and comments. It's fantastic to see, because ultimately we're just having dialogue. And I think
let me wrap it up. Let me wrap it up with this, Peter.
Sure.
And this is something that I've learned just in the last 10 years that is important to me. That's why I want to say it. I'm not perfect at it, but it's important to me. And that is, I discovered that I tended to live my life ostensibly as like I was going to live forever. What I mean by that is I would do all sorts of things that if I was laying on my deathbed and you said to me, what do you wish you had done more of, and what do you wish you had done less of? Much of my time was spent doing things that I wished I would do less of. And I decided, look, I'm not 3. Kids have a problem with the future. They can't. It's difficult for them to extrapolate future. Adults were able to do that. A mature adult is able to do that. And I go, I should be able to sit here now and imagine my deathbed and go, what sorts of things would I wish I had done more and less of, and start doing those now, more and less of those right now. And so I made a list of things, and the top of my list was kindness. I never believe I'm going to be on my deathbed and say, I wish I'd been less kind.
No.
Yeah. And so now kindness can involve pushing. It can involve pushback. So I'm not saying I've become a milquetoast. I haven't, because you see me in the group.
No.
But I truly believe that if we are kind to people, that's what matters.
Yeah,
that's it. That's my final. That's my final claim.
I agree. What a beautiful point to land on. You can't go wrong with just being kinder to people and kinder to yourself.
Thanks for the chance to be here,
mate. I've loved it. Thank you, everyone, for watching. John, I hope we can have you back again. Tomorrow, I'm having a chat with Paul Richardson, who questioned my claim that Ted Wilson was a real Adventist, and I'm looking forward to that. So join me tomorrow, same time, 12:30 Australian time, 6:30 LA time. John Borton, you're amazing. I encourage everyone to go and join SDA Fight Club and find out more about John and his comments. And one last quick thing, go and get John's book for free. Do it now. The links are in Facebook. The link's right there in YouTube. I'm going to add it to YouTube again later. I'm going to listen to it myself this afternoon. And Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. So everyone go and check out She Said, They Said by John Borton. Thanks,
Thanks
mate,
a lot.
and talk to you soon.
Appreciate it.